Good afternoon, folks. I'm going to call this session to order. We just had a lovely time at the groundbreaking over at South Albany High School for the quad. And so, Dr. Zuniga, if you can do roll call.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, again. We just want to make a note that President Mr. Salcedo is recovering from surgery, and he will not be able to attend today's meeting. So we'll start off with the rest of the roll call. Member Ricardo Padilla.
Here.
Member Florencio Briones.
Present.
Member Stella Torres Segres.
Present.
And Member David Diaz.
Here.
And hopeful that our student member will be able to be here this evening. She's scheduled to arrive too. Zilali Palacios, who is not present at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Zuniga. And now, members, if you can join me in the flag salute, please stand. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you. And then up next, we have the approval of the agenda.
Move to approve tonight's agenda.
Second. First and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have public comment. Dr. Zuniga, do we have any public comments tonight?
At this time, there's no public comment submitted.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Section B, information. Number 1, ethnic studies presentation. Dr. Zuniga?
Thank you, Vice President Diaz. This is a project that we have been working on to provide to the board as an update. With the schedules that we have for our board meetings, we wanted to be sure that the allotted time is provided to the ethnic studies presentation, since this is something that has been recently adopted by the board and with the support of our Board of Trustees. And I'm excited to actually have some of our teachers here who are instructing our kids in ethnic studies, overseeing the development of the curriculum over the past couple of years. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Ciso so he could introduce our folks and also start the presentation for ethnic studies update to the board. Mr. Ciso?
Okay, well, I'll have them come up. Come on up, Brian. Okay, this is real timely. You know, the last couple of years, actually goes back 3 years when they started developing this program. And with the board support, they have built an amazing program over the last few years. We're one of the few districts around that does ethnic studies as a graduate requirement. But one of the things that that I'm really proud of is the word's getting out there on how successful they are and what great work they're doing. We just actually, just like a few minutes ago at 4:18, we got an email from LACO, from the Coordinator of History and Social Science, telling us that they would like us, and I'll just read this one line. With your permission, we would like to showcase your program, our ethnic studies program, in the toolkit by directing users to your courses. Consider your approach as an option for their district. So there's a lot of districts that are looking at us now as the model program, and I'm very proud of you guys. This is they've worked really hard. And I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of where we're going. And, you know, Brian and I were earlier talking about hopefully possibly in the future making a senior level class also, because we know kids that want to go on and study some more. So thanks, guys, and you guys introduce your team. I know it's going to be on video also, so you can kind of talk about where we started. And I know you're doing your presentation, but I'm really proud of you both, okay? Go ahead.
Go first, Alfred.
Good evening. It's good to see you all. I want to say thank you for allowing us the opportunity to pretty much, create something that, we felt was long needed, especially in these conditions today. When we first launched the program and as a requirement, it was, very dire times and pressing times. So I think it's only, contextual and responsive in its many ways. So I'll begin. We'll be sharing a little glimpse of what we're doing in our classrooms, a little bit, right? If you want to see the real thing, come by, visit us. Our doors are always open, right? But let's begin. So, as I always do, Brian himself too at El Monte, Mr. Weller alongside with me. We like to begin our classroom with what I call our breath of life. You know, I tell my students, you know, this is a little piece of, you know, of what some of our ancestors left behind. You know, some of the things that survived, you know, throughout colonization, and you know, it's a beautiful little poem that some of you may be familiar with, and I like to begin my class with this little poem. So I tell my class, when I say in Lakesh, y'all say halaken. So when I say in Lakesh, y'all say what? Halaken. Which, you know, translates to I am you and you are me. And every morning, every day, every period, I remind our students of our connection to ourselves and our connection to others, and even the connection to the land. So I began with this little poem that goes something like this. Tú eres mi otro yo. Si te hago daño a ti, me hago daño a mí mismo. Si te amo y respeto, me amo y respeto yo. Which translates to, you are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. And I do this every single day to remind our students, to remind myself, and to remind all of us why we're here and what we hope to do with this class and what we hope to do with just our presence around each other. So that's what we begin every day. And it's a little poem written by Luis Valdez, but inspired by the Maya traditions. So as much as we want to acknowledge ourselves and each other, it's very important that we acknowledge the land that we stand on. So I want to acknowledge that with respect to the Tomba, the stewards of this land before we came to live here, on whose traditional, ancestral, and unceded land we live and work on, and whose historical relationships to this land continue. And you know, this brings up the idea of like understanding where we live and the stories, the voices, the people that once and still live here today. You know, I like to remind my students that, you know, we must acknowledge and respect the land that we're on. Traditionally, you know, our ancestors always asked for permission when they spoke. So I asked for permission for the Tomba, the elders and the ancestors of this land, to speak to you today. And I also like to tell what happened to this land, right? How did we get here is the question. You know, that's one of our units. Where are we? And I think it's very important to teach and express our commitment to the indigenous people of this land and how we got here, right? Which is, you know, brings up the idea of, you know, one of my favorite authors, Roxana Ortiz, that says, you know, unless we face the ghosts of this nation, we will continue to spiral into violence, fanaticism, endless wars, and cruel oppressions of marginalized people. So it's important to recognize what was here before and how we got here. And with that, I say this acknowledgement to the indigenous people of this land. So our team includes, as you mentioned, right, we worked many hours to put this together. Thanks to the facilitators, Dr. Chris Lewis, Alex Ryan Rosemead, Mr. Michael Weller right here beside me, and along with the teachers, Alex Castaneda, Francesca Charamonte, Jorge Jara from Arroyo, Gilbert Velasquez at South El Monte, myself, Alfred Mendoza, right here at Mount View, Mr. Brian Tabatabai at El Monte, and Christine Sandoval at Rosemead, and Michael Weller again at Mount View High School. So here's a little video from someone that couldn't join us here today. He's gonna go ahead and break down the units in the course overview. You know, the tenets, the units, and the EQs that we put together for this program.
Good evening, Board of Trustees, Cabinet, and community members. My name is Dr. Chris Lewis, and I am currently a teacher on special assignment supporting emerging multilingual students at Mountain View High School. I have been a part of the Ethnic Studies Committee since it began almost a decade ago. From the beginning, the exploratory committee that formed in 2015 focused on developing a curriculum that was responsive to the cultural and linguistic needs of our community. The approved course outline, collaboratively developed by ethnic studies teachers, has 3 units. The introductory unit creates the foundation for the course by reviewing a brief history of ethnic studies and why it is important. Unit 1 helps students answer the question, who am I? by exploring the various aspects of identity, how identities are shaped, and how students understand their own identities. Unit 2 focuses on the history of various racial and ethnic communities and their experiences. This unit includes an analysis of broader historical movements and emphasizes local history in the San Gabriel Valley. The last unit emphasizes the role of activism and agency, where people are capable of transforming the world to make it more inclusive and to challenge racism and discrimination. We began offering ethnic studies during distance learning in the 2020-2021 school year. Each site has offered a different number of sections, and a majority of students are enrolled are in the 9th grade. Data is collected through a survey at the end of each semester so that we can get feedback about the course and about our teaching practices. These are just a few of the highlights. The data show that overall, students have had a positive experience in the course. More than 85% of students had a better understanding about the purpose and goals of ethnic studies by the end of the class. 65% of students identified that they strongly agreed that their understanding of issues related to race and ethnicity also improved. And lastly, more than 80% of students agreed they had a better understanding of issues related to gender and sexuality. This was a topic students requested more information about. Therefore, we developed and shared some lessons about the concepts of intersectionality, specifically as it relates to the experiences of women and the LGBTQ+ community. These are just a few selected responses given by students. One student at Albany High School, answering the question, "What would you tell someone who asked you about the experience of taking ethnic studies?" said, "I would tell them it is a truly beautiful experience in that it really opens your eyes to see the world and other people in a way better perspective. Just learning about people's culture and being able to talk about it is a really fun experience." I look forward to continuing our collaboration and development of the course with input from the community, but particularly from our students.
All right. That was Dr. Lewis. I could take it. I'll continue. All right. So right here, just a little a glimpse into how we frame our analysis or our critical thinking lessons when it comes to reading stories. Right. I remind my students that sometimes it's very hard to we gotta be brave and courageous to face some of these stories when it comes to voices that have been historically marginalized or erased, right? We are speaking of colonized people, of people who've endured through traumatic experiences, or we see the historical trauma. And in this in this model, right, the ethnic studies praxis story plotline is one that we apply to stories such as the ones we read in East of East or other excerpts that we read that are bringing up traumatic narratives of survivors of marginalized people. So in this plot line, you see how we're able to equip our students with a more critical lens or an anti-oppressive lens when it comes to identifying oppression or identifying effects of colonialism or colonization. So it brings a series of questions, right, of identifying not only the trauma and exposing the problem, but also looking at how communities who have been historically traumatized also endure, because we don't want to be stuck in the pain. We don't want to be just telling traumatic stories, right? It's more about how have people overcome such experiences, and how have people survived and continue to thrive when it comes to the trauma that they endure. So this is just one of the frameworks and templates that we apply to our lessons to fully analyze and question systems of power, systems of oppression, and overall looking at the idea of survivability or hope and endurance and resiliency, which is a key facet in our studies, right? That we don't not just get stuck in the pain, and that's something we wanted to share with y'all, that we're doing different things to instill this sense of resiliency, not only through stories, but in our students' lives that could go through these timelines as well. And to move on, I wanted to share something that we're doing too, right? Something that I'm doing in my classroom. You know, ethnic studies is not just sharing stories of people, but it's also an academically rigorous course, right? We focus on the various skills such as reading, writing, listening, speaking, and critical thinking. So the way I share the screen is to show some of the snippets or excerpts that we read from, right? So in my reading, I share with my students chapters from the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, where we look at, how we got here, right? Where we are, and to understand the effects of colonization till today. We also, of course, we bring up the local text, right? The East of East text to channel down an understanding of how we got here, right? And where we are. And we also take excerpts from the Rethinking Ethnic Studies curriculum as well. And right here, I'm just sharing a little bit of what we do, right? So right here is a little identities flower that I work with my students, where they not only identify, but they also look at the intersections of their identity, right? So a question that I asked them to write on, reflecting on their identities, is who am I as an intersectional human being, right? It's more like, how are our social identities intersecting? And above all is, identifying the various systems of oppression like racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, right? And how they may be targeted, and above all, how they can identify these oppressions, both ideologically, institutionally, interpersonally, and even internalized forms of oppression. So it's a lot of reflection, and I believe it's really rooted in wellness, because to be able to identify oppression, and especially if you are internalizing those oppressions, it tends to be a bit of a healing component to the course, right? Where we are not just calling out oppression, but also finding ways to combat it and first of all identify it, and then later combat it and move forward to take action, right? Because hope begins to be hope when it's action. So right here we also look at art, right? We do things like art analysis, and we apply the different levels of thinking. And when it comes to like local histories and history period, right? I like to ask the question, why is counter narrative so powerful in advancing truth and justice? Just to get them to think, right? How important it is to acknowledge other stories, especially of voices that have been marginalized. I also like to do a lot of listening activities with podcasts, music, oral histories. And then lastly, of course, the speaking, right? I like to engage the students in talking circles, class discussions, and just to showcase the rigor and the various levels of thinking that we're applying in our course. And in the next slide right here, I have a different approach, right? A UDL, Universal Design Learning, where I tap into different knowledges, right? Different skills. And right here, after reading East of East, here are some of the art pieces from my classroom artists that were able to capture some of the essence of these local narratives. So right here, you see a little commemoration to Gloria de Llanes, a local Tomba elder in our community. Here we see the figure of Toypurina. And then right here, this one, I think the student saw herself in Toypurina, because it looks a lot like the student that painted this picture, but she was trying to paint Toypurina as herself. So as these students are seeing themselves in these stories, for example, like Toypurina right there, one of the first Tomba medicine woman who resisted the Spanish mission system. And we see other interpretations of like the memories of El Monte, and we see the white supremacist movements in El Monte, and the Wild Paths, one of the chapters written by one of our teachers right here, Mr. Weller. And these are just to show, the different knowledges that we're tapping into, right? Not just writing, but also, artistic ability from my classroom. So those are just some of the things from my classroom. And up next, I have Mr. Brian Tabatabai to share a little bit of his.
Just push down. All right. There we go. Good evening. Thank you for having us here. I am Brian Tabatabai. I teach at Albany High School. And just a little bit about my experience with ethnic studies. I want to actually talk about the distance learning. There was some question that first year if we should actually start the program in distance. And I'm so grateful that the decision was made to go forward. I had parents who sat in on my classes with their kids during distance. They jumped in, they told stories. I had a grandfather who lived in the Elysian Park area of Dodger Stadium, and his granddaughter didn't know that they lost their home and things like that, and that came out. I had another father who came in and talked about how his dad was a bracero, and I just had parents come to me and said we just loved to sit and listen to the class, and thank you for sharing this. And for me as well, as a teacher, just teaching this class empowered me, right? As I was teaching the class and I'm sharing with the students and we're talking about taking action, right? And making our communities better. And I'm sitting in West Covina and I'm thinking these thoughts, right? The class kind of motivated me. I ended up running for city council in West Covina and getting elected. This course empowered me and strengthened me, and it was something I was able to share with the students. And just again, this collaboration and critical talk. This is something that occurs often in my class. Here they read the chapter on Toipurina from the East of East book, but they did it in a way that was engaging, where they were talking through it, where they were talking with each other without using verbal language. All of the talking was through writing. So the class was silent, but they're writing to each other, and it was a beautiful thing that we just actually did this one a few days ago. But that's one of the things ethnic studies has allowed us to do, right? My students speak, right? There is a lot of just engagement. It's not passive learning, right? They're not just sitting receiving information. No, they're bringing the information, right? They're bringing their home stories. They're bringing, we talk about the ancestors, but we bring that. I share a lot with them. My grandmother, she was repatriated during the Depression. She was born in Waco, Texas, but, and I brought that to my students, and there's just this community that we've been able to create, and I just sense it when they go to their other classes. They're bringing it that as well, and so as far as this class, and I know that Mr. Cecil mentioned, I have upperclassmen who've been asking, how can we take your class? How can we get into that class? And then, I have the freshmen as they leave. When can we take more, right? When can we learn more, right? When can we get into this other issue? And I'm like, yeah, let's get that. Let's connect with Rio Hondo. Let's do the dual enrollment. Let's get you college credits, and let's get you to that next level, because they're ready. And at first I was a little hesitant when they said freshmen, right? And you're like, are they ready? Oh, these freshmen just blow my mind. They come with language. They come with the depth of knowledge and thought, and I have just been blown away by the students. And I think, when people are saying, hey, this is a model, it's a model because of our students, honestly, because they've come ready to to engage in the material, engage in the discussions. They want it, they yearn for it, and then they make it happen. Like I said, I mean, probably if you came into my classroom on this day, you'd been like, why are we paying this guy? You know, as I'm just kind of walking around, but you know, they're doing the work. So let me pass it on. I'll come back in a little bit.
Okay, good evening, board members, cabinet members, and community members. I'm Michael Weller. As Alfred mentioned, I teach at Mountain View. And I just wanted to share briefly about how we approached East of East last semester. Last year, I helped as a facilitator with the course outline, but I wasn't teaching East of East, so I think it's appropriate. I'm sorry, I wasn't teaching ethnic studies, so I think it's appropriate that Alfred and Brian shared more because they have more experience. But I was really excited about reading East of East with the students last semester. We're about to begin reading this semester, but the way I did it last semester, and I'm going to do it similarly this time, is that the kids looked at the book and then took their top. I solicited their top 3 choices with a Google form, and then I formed book groups. And so the kids read and took notes. They wrote an ace paragraph to identify a main point, and then we did an idea that I actually borrowed from Alfred, which was to do a young people's history. So one of the things we've noticed is that there's in East of East, it's a lot of it. It's not entirely written for a graduate or a college audience, but a lot of it's written by professional. Well, most of it's written by professional historians, so it's can be challenging. And so we thought, you know, what if our kids created something that eventually, if we had a collection of young people's history, perhaps we could share that with the middle schools, and then the middle school students could have access to this content in a way that might be a little bit more difficult if they didn't have these materials. So, I'm going the wrong way. So I wanted to share this particular infographic on Caribbean Fragosos, All the Zumba Ladies, which is one of my favorite pieces in the book. And I really felt that, I linked to it because it's a little hard to see here. But I thought that this kind of captured what Alfred was talking about, the rigor, or what I called critical literacy. And then also the anti-oppression analysis. I feel like this is really celebrating what the article or the essay by Caribbean Fragosa is celebrating, which is feminism and celebrating being themselves, the ladies who participate in the Zumba studio on Garvey Avenue. And it's something that could be shared with younger students. I think they would be able to understand it. It's bright and visually attractive, but also shows critical reading and critical literacy. So we also want to share our next steps. So we're continuing to build, we would like to build a website as well that we could share with folks outside the district, as well as with, for example, for onboarding teachers. We have a Google Classroom, a model Google Classroom that we use to share resources. So when we create something for our classes that we think would be helpful for our colleagues, we post it to that Google Classroom. We want to continue to improve community and student engagement. So how can we get the community and students maybe who aren't taking ethnic studies to, eventually everyone will take it, but how can we get the students who at this point aren't taking ethnic studies to learn about the work that's being done? And then, as Brian was suggesting, maybe offer it to more students. And continue to ask for student feedback about the course, as Dr. Lewis talked about in his video. And I'll hand it back to Brian.
Yeah. And for us, I think because ethnic studies has been something that really a community of educators has really been fighting to get to be part of our K through 12 education. There has been a lot of outside collaboration with teachers in other districts, content specialists across the state and across the country. And so that's something that we've continued to build on. I know Alfred and I are part of a professional learning community, and we meet monthly. And then I know I've never, I've been in the district for, now 20 years, and this is the closest I've been to teachers at the other high schools, right? I mean, I really, working with teachers from Mountain View, from South Albany, from Arroyo, one of the teachers from South one day during the meeting, he was speaking so powerfully, brought tears, right? And so when you're collaborating with other professionals and they're right drawing that emotion from you, it's powerful. It connects you to the district in a way that is special. And I think that's been a big part for us, and we want to continue to grow that and like, Mr. Cecil was saying, right, expand that and expand what this really is to these other districts. I was on a WASC up in Bakersfield at Shafter High School, and they were, when they found out I was teaching ethnic studies, they had a lot of questions, and that was the big thing I tried to impart in them is, it's big for your community, right? Because ethnic studies really is about this space. For them, it'll be about Shafter and Bakersfield. For us, it's about El Monte, right? And it really is. It roots us here, right? And when I think about public school is about community, right? It's the center of the community. And this class really centers us all, right? Brings us closer together. Just continue for us as professionals to grow the class. And again, just make it something that when our students leave, right, they've had this experience that when they're on that college campus, right, they have that foundation and they have that empowerment to really thrive and be leaders. Anyone last comments or questions?
I just want to say that ethnic studies is beyond the syllabus, it's beyond the content. As Brian has mentioned, it's a way of thinking, right? It has transformed us, and hopefully our students are transforming. And very important, right, to as we've been working with Romeo and the East of East folks, right, they're helping us localize our history, which brings on the topic of our connection to space, to land, which is a big part of our wellness, right? To feel connected, to be collaborating and learning where we stand. And with that said, thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you, folks, for your presentation. I think as one of the board members that championed this initiative, in particular with the mandatory requirement, it stems from my own lived experience of having gone to Rio Hondo College, been enrolled in a humanities classroom to learn about the history of what's happened to our people. And so, everything that you all shared today, I think it's actually going above and beyond what I imagined it to be. I just want to thank you all for the work that you've done. And, on the other side, on my professional side, we're working with Dr. Romel Guzman and East of East folks in CMAP. We just conducted the Greater Asian American Experience Bike Ride. And we have 2 more events that we're going to be hosting with the community. And we're donating 25 bikes to Mountain View High School. So hopefully some of those students that have bikes over at Mountain View High School are going to be joining us for future rides. So just really impressed. I really thank you for all the work. And I think I'm going to allow my colleagues to, provide their comments or questions as well. But, I'm just interested in knowing what's next, because I think Mr. Briones brought up integration within our entire curriculum, how ethnic studies can be integrated or actually looking at other ways, because as you all mentioned, it goes beyond just that single class, right? It's really going above and beyond into the community. So just thank you and appreciation for the work. So with that, Mr. Stella Torres-Sigris, any comments or questions?
Yes, I have a comment about this. When you were talking about this book that actually we have it in, and I started to read it, unfortunately I didn't finish it, but it came to my mind. In the 60s, they were compulsory, a book that the students have to read. It was Ramona. And Ramona talks about, the book talks about the background of the Indians in San Gabriel, and talks about also when the Spanish came. Not only that, Spanish came from Mexico bringing people that they were the Indians too. And from there, we have a new generation here in California. That was ethnic studies, the one that they were doing back in the 60s. What do you think? Because I remember, I'm an old person. I know a lot of people that they studied high school in the 60s, and they said that they were studying the Book of Ramona was very important because they were studying, and people that their background was Hispanic background. And at that time, they didn't call ethnic studies, but that was a book that it was compulsory to read at that time. What do you think about? Do you think that they started to have at that time ethnic studies?
So what we teach in our class about ethnic studies is that, it's a result of a long and bloody student strike at San Francisco City College in the 60s. Right? It was after Dr. King was assassinated, the Vietnam War, right? There's a lot of social unrest, and it was students of color who felt compelled to bring their stories and center their stories in curriculum. So when we're speaking of centering certain voices, such as indigenous, black, or other people of color, that is one tenet of ethnic studies, to center and bring up some of those voices that we never learn about or hear from. So it could be part of our ethnic studies course that we get a hand of that book.
And another question that I have is that we are talking about this book. These are general for Hispanic students. What about the students that they are Asiatic students?
Yeah,
How do you put that ethnic studies? Because they are also demanding parents from Asiatic students. They want to know what kind of ethnic studies are we going to have in our classes, in our curriculum.
So something that's brought up in the East of East book is that intersection of other people of color we share classrooms with, right? Which is our Asian population, a growing population. So the book also acknowledges that, even our Asian classmates felt excluded from the curriculum, right? Prior to bringing such stories to the classroom. So that's something that's brought up in East of East, right? Some of the, the stories of our Asian American neighbors.
Yeah, they talk about like Chinese immigration, the Japanese internment, the Thai raid in El Monte.
Yeah.
So that's covered in East of East.
Right, yeah, and I was able, when they just had the 80th anniversary of Japanese internment, we were able, that next day, right, it was on the weekend, and that Monday, we were able to really look at that chapter in East of East. And for the students to see that a population in El Monte that was really important, seemingly erased, right? And just it floored the students, right? And we've covered the Chinese massacre in downtown LA. We've told those stories, right? The stories of Chinese exclusion and the partnership of the Filipinos and Mexican migrant workers in the berry strikes in El Monte. I mean, when you're talking about, our classrooms and when they read the stories of this, this common community of, Filipinos and Mexicans, right? And these communities that are often, put, to conflict. But then they actually see, they together work to better their circumstances. When they read that, the Japanese students had to go to the Mexican school, right? And then they realize, oh, you know what? We're connected, right? We're all connected, and they see each other in the stories, right? And again, I think that's the beautiful part of ethnic studies. It isn't just the Hispanic, right? It's not just the Japanese. No, it's right. This whole community, right? It's all of us, and then finding those commonalities, right? Where we share and then again, like I said, that closeness, and then they're invested, right? My Latino students are invested in that Japanese internment, right? My Vietnamese students are invested in Hicks Camp and the Berry Strikes, right? And they want to learn each other's stories, hear each other's stories. And, I think that's, any parent who were to come, I'm like, oh no, you're here too, right? You're part of our class too. All of you are part of our class.
That's great. Any other
No,
comments?
it's okay. The answer is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I really
Mr.
like it. Thank you.
Mr.
I'm
Briones?
going to go back to my book.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Thank you for your presentation tonight. I'm thrilled to see the amount of activity that's going on in the program. And as Mr. Diaz had mentioned earlier, really excited to see how we can continue to incorporate ethnic studies not only as a standalone class, but also into the curriculum in other subject areas, because as all of you have mentioned, the intersectionality is key here, because none of us live in a vacuum, and our lives are not siloed. So I think it's important to make sure that we're helping our students make those connections. And when they have those aha moments, one of the big aha moments for me was taking a college course and understanding that a lot of what I was taught, including what I was taught in high school here at Albany Union High School District, wasn't the complete narrative. And so I think it's important that the students learn history from a perspective of understanding, not just to memorialize facts, but to understand the impact that that those events have had on today, and more importantly, how they continue to impact our lives moving forward. I did have a couple of questions. One, as part of the course, have you considered, obviously you discuss a lot of local history and the stories of the students and the community. Have you taken any trips to either La Historia Society here in Monte or the Albany Historical Society to take a look at some of those topics that you've discussed, like the Berry Strikes, Japanese internment, Vietnam era here in El Monte, from those two institutions?
We haven't. I think, last year, obviously, COVID made that very difficult. And just getting back on campus, we're still kind of getting our feet. In a way, we're coming out of, Omicron, but I think it's been very difficult to think about doing any sort of field trip type stuff. But I think that would make a lot of sense, particularly to the La Historia Society. So that is certainly something that I would be in support of, and we can explore with our admin back at our sites.
Thank you. Mr. Cecil, sorry.
Yeah, I was talking to Mr.
Yes,
Tabatabai right before I go, we need to get these kids out because, I was explaining, I grew up in Albany. I didn't realize the racism out there. I lived in a bubble, in Albany. And it's really nice to, when they be able to take these kids now to different areas of Los Angeles where they can see the different kind of cultures and how they, even the local museum. But, we highly support them getting the kids out and really looking at the different cultures or different areas within Los Angeles. So, yeah, and we also talked about a possible dual enrollment class where kids at one, because we were expressing these kids want to go beyond, well, then let's provide these opportunities for these kids. So we talked about that also. But I could just say really quick that it's incredible the work they've done. They've really worked as a team over the last 2-3 years now. Really collaborating, working hard, having regular meetings, and we continue to support that. And we tell them whatever they need, let us know. We support them along the way. And they've had a really good collaboration meetings. You guys do it regularly, once a month now?
Sometimes twice a month.
Twice a month, yeah. So, thank you.
Yeah, and because we've been meeting with Romeo too, and so, we're meeting quite a bit.
Yeah.
But we've done virtual, right? So I've taken them on like virtual tours of the spaces. Just when I mentioned the Chinese massacre, right? I think to actually walk that area, I mean, there's power there, right? To walk the areas here in El Monte, right? I know the bike ride, I've been wanting to go on the bike ride, right? But because there is something to that. And so, yeah, that has always been in our mind to take it beyond, right, the classroom. I think, again, as COVID is moving away and we have that ability, that's definitely something that we've made space for in our units to be able to do.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions, Briones? Just very quickly, one of the big takeaways is I think this the course allows students or empowers students to tell their stories.
Yeah.
Last year, I read a book by Maria Hinojosa, who's a producer of Latino USA on NPR. Also, an author. And the book is Once I Was You. And the big takeaway was we have to tell our stories. And I think a lot of our students, not for lack of opportunity, but I think just because it's not something that they're accustomed to, don't. And I know our students have a lot to share. Case in point, quite a bit of what's in East of East comes from staff like you, our faculty who's here today, community members, some of my own family members contributed to the book. And it's important that those stories are told. And I think by providing this space, students have that opportunity to not only learn about their community, but learn about themselves and then share that and have that ongoing dialogue. So I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. I appreciate the support from the district administration and your site administrators, and of course from the Board of Trustees. So thank you again for being here. Thank you, Mr. Briones. Mr. Padilla?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I can feel the passion in every single one of you. And I've actually have been in some of your classes when you've been teaching. And I was telling Dr. Zuniga, I was in Mr. Tabai's class, and there's classes that you walk into sometimes and you just kind of want to sit and just observe the teacher in action. Same thing with Mr. Mendoza. He and I have met for lunch in the past, and just his passion comes out. He starts talking with his hands and he's in the zone. He's at another level, and I understand that. But this is my 30th year in education. I've been around for quite some time. And in education, all three of you I know about the 4 C's, the collaboration, the communication, the critical thinking, and the creativity. Ethnic studies has all that. When I watch all of you working together from Mountain View High School and Albany High School, just that collaboration that takes place, not only are you creating that for yourselves, but also for the students, okay? You've been so creative with all the different pieces of the curriculum that you're bringing in so that it's not just lecture, but there's a combination of to hit everybody's learning modalities. You've had to be creative. You've had to think critically. And I love the poem because everything is interconnected. The thing for me when I went to college, and I always say this, there's only 2 black guys, and then there was 2 Latinos, and everybody was white. And I went to a private university, 2 private universities, APU, and specifically I'm talking when I received my master's. And I always tell that story that I didn't see that other Latino guy till they lined us up for graduation. And he said, "I thought you dropped out." And I said, "I thought you did too." So it was awesome for us to see each other there. But probably the closest thing back in 1991 when I graduated from high school, Rosemead High School, and then went off to Rio Hondo College, was there's no such thing as ethnic studies, The best class I ever took from my entire career, master's degree and beyond, and all my credentials, was Mexican art history and Mexican culture with Marta Carreon. Because in my K-12 education, I never found me in the stories that I learned in my English literature classes. I always saw English literature of like these white guys that had history, but only white guys had history. Nobody said that to me, but those were the stories that I would read, and I was like, what about like people that look like me or talk like me and move their hands a lot like me and Mr. Mendoza, When I'm an elected official, I'm like, okay, I have to, bring them down. But it's like, that's not the real me. So thank you for having collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity. Also, the curriculum in your classes, you guys bring the 3 R's, the relationships, okay? There's rigor in there because I saw what's embedded into your curriculum. And then also the relevance, like, why are you teaching me this? Well, I'm teaching you this so that when you go off to college and there's a whole lot of white people, okay, or a whole lot of Asian people, and there's only a little bit of you, you don't doubt yourself when you're there. Because I've been there, done that, where I'm like, well, maybe I'm not rich enough. Well, maybe I'm not poor enough. Well, maybe I don't belong here. And you start questioning yourself, and it brings down your self-esteem, and you kind of want to run home and go back home because you think you don't belong there. So when you teach a class like this, it empowers our students to enter a system that has been created not for them. The system is still, stacked against many minorities, because when you go off to these universities and stuff, you're no longer in El Monte. And I'm sure you guys experience the same thing. I know Mr. Cecil says, I grew up in El Monte, and I'm like in El Monte, and I listen to him, but I'm like, but you're still white. So you're gonna have white privilege, and I'm sure you talk about white privilege in your classes a little bit. It's not good, not bad, it just has existed, so we must talk about it. And you talk about topics that are kind of make people uncomfortable. Like, oh my God, like I have to touch on that. Yes, you have to touch on that, because if you don't touch on that, and then when our kids see it, they don't know how to react to it or how to deal with that, and you end up with college dropouts, okay? So I like your statistics that you gave. Early on, Dr. Lewis said, I've been on this committee for 10 years. That's how long we dragged our tail with trying to create the perfect ethnic studies program. There is no such thing as a perfect ethnics program. It's gonna be whatever your community is. If you have a lot of Chinese, a lot of Vietnamese, whatever those ethnic groups are in your community, you must bring them to the table to build those relationships so that our Asian kids and our white kids and our black kids see that we have more in common than we do apart. So kudos to you guys. I just want to keep going with all this. One other note that I had here. We have now created in ethnic studies a system or a place where those stories can be told. Before, there was no place in the curriculum where students were daring enough to share that, like, oh, these are some Mexican things that I do. And that whole premise of like, well, that ethnic studies class, and I hear it when I go to CSBA, because when I go to CSBA, it's mainly, a whole lot of Republicans and a whole lot of Caucasian people that have this fear or these perceptions that are not always the truth about minorities. But they have the fear that you're going to take all of our minority kids and you're going to make them racist minorities against whites. That's something that you have to talk about in there, that no, this is not just displaying the culture of Latinos and leaving the Chinese out, leaving the Vietnamese out, or leaving whatever the ethnic group is in your community. You have to talk about it, though. We cannot be afraid to not talk about it, because if we don't talk, that's a problem we have today in our society. Nobody wants to talk about anything. So who better than you teachers to educate? And something you said stuck with me. And I know that there's some teachers who have these perceptions of our freshmen that they don't have a whole lot to bring to the table, and they floored you when they come in and they tell you the stories. You hear it from the mouth of babes, like, oh my God, they have all that knowledge, all the experience. Why? Because the majority of the people who live in the city are resilient people. They know about resiliency. They might not know what the word resiliency means or the definition, but they do it every day. Their parents do it every day. So more power to you guys. And I'll end with this. Thank you to Mr. Cecil. Let me tell you, there's uncomfortable board meetings and we go at it here back and forth, but I know that's one meeting that Mr. Cecil will not forget, because the board was very direct and told him, like, which part of Start Ethnic Studies don't you get, Mr. Cecil? And you remember that meeting, right, Mr. Cecil? And I'm not trying to make you feel uncomfortable. I'm just trying to tell it like it is, that I'm glad that after 10 years of all these people being in this committee, we finally started. I don't care if it's not the perfect program, because you're gonna save those group of kids that we got when they were freshmen, and when they graduate in 4 years, we're gonna send them off. They're not gonna have that feeling that Mr. Padilla had of, I don't belong here, I'm not worthy, I'm not rich enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. And so I applaud you for that, and I will support anything that has to do with ethnic studies, and I know that it will only get better as you tailor your craft and you include more things, more diverse methods and pieces into the curriculum. So thank you guys for doing all the work that you do. And I'm glad to hear that other people will come looking at us and, modeling their program after us. So thank you for what you do. My respects. This is going to be one of the most powerful classes, if not the most powerful class that we offer in our curriculum as we prepare our students to go off to all these private universities within California or outside California. Because even when you go to school here in California, people don't look like us, like you, or like me. And if you go out of state, it's even worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Zuniga, do you have any comments or remarks that you'd like to make?
A lot of you have said what's on my mind, and growing up in the community again is sometimes having resentment for not having the material and really focusing on what the TV is telling you or with the programs you watched and the people that didn't look at you that you wanted to be like. Having this opportunity to have that dialogue in the classroom really is going to change that mindset for those who are first generation students that are adapting to not only a new culture or a new country, but also continue to be proud about who they are and where they come from too. And in my opinion, that was lacking a lot when we were growing up because there was nothing like this. So I applaud you, as Mr. Padilla said, that this ethnic studies course will continue to grow and prosper and serve all of our student needs within that classroom setting based on their gender, their demographics, their income, whatever the case is. They're part of the community. I think it needs to be celebrated. So that's a segue to ethnic studies. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zuniga, and thank you, folks. We wish you have a good night, and we're excited about what's next. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we're going to move into section C, which is oral written communication. I see that our student board member, Lali, hasn't been able to join us yet. Dr. Zuniga, do you have a written communication from our student board member tonight?
Yeah, I don't have any formal update for you, but I do want to acknowledge that I don't know what happened to Lali. She was scheduled to be here. She did want to share a project she's been working on from the Panther Post. It's an article on the achievement gap at Roadway High School within AP programs. So this is a really good article about the attention to the lack of Latino, Hispanic students in AP courses. This focuses on Roadway High School, but I understand also this is an issue that we have seen throughout our district, throughout LA County, throughout California, probably the U.S., and it's a really good article, so I invite you to read it. She wanted to kind of introduce that to you and give you just something to read about what the students have been writing about, getting attention about our AP student needs for how to further promote or engage Latino students into AP and challenge them to take those courses, but give them the confidence and the tools and resources that they need to feel confident. Another thing about feeling confident and getting in that AP class and being successful with that support. So I think we have those articles for you that we'll provide to you as well tonight. For myself, just a quick update on where we're at with our requirement for COVID and conditions that we're facing. You know that as a school district, we have continued to require masking indoors, and for the most part have received positive feedback from our families, from our teachers, from our staff, our students. They still continue to wear the mask outdoors as well, and though this is more optional, it kind of shows a sense that we collectively overall understand that when the county and the state strongly recommend something, that we feel that that's important to understand and realize. So we're going to continue to do that throughout the month of March. In about 2 weeks, we'll revisit that where we're at. I spoke with CSEA. They had their meeting. They got feedback from their members. They were comfortable to continue that ongoing through the month and even beyond if necessary. So that was good feedback from them as well as the teachers too. I also plan to meet with our Super PAC parents too, kind of get input about what the feelings out there with our parents as well. So that way there's a collaborative input as far as gathering information. But nevertheless, I'm happy about the progress that this community has made as far as the case rates. Having 90% plus of our students vaccinated, that's just outstanding. And we're going to continue to push forward to the end of the school year and hopefully finish strong. And as we continue to reduce transmission rates in COVID cases too. But it's still there. We're still in the pandemic, even exiting out one of the major surges, but it's still there and being mindful about that too. And then that's all I have for now, and I'll give you just one of my roundtables about maybe a future date for our board study and board retreat that we have for the summer coming up. Okay? So thank you, Vice President.
Thank you, Dr. Zuniga. Members, it is 7 o'clock. We have been seated for approximately 2 hours. Mr. Elatar has a 44-slide presentation ahead of us. Would we like a 5 to 10 minute break at this time, or are we okay moving through the presentation?
I'm okay with moving forward.
I'm okay too.
Okay.
Are you okay?
So with that, Mr. Elatar, the next one is the budget study session, review of the Albany High School District,
Okay.
budget and second interim presentation.
Well, I'm happy to see the excitement in the crowd about the presentations and the budget session that we will be providing.
I hear there's about 500 people watching on YouTube, Mr. Elatar. So
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Okay. First, I want to thank Mr. David Norton, the Director of Fiscal Services, for putting this together, as well as working hard on a second interim and all of the fiscal reports that we have for this year. This has been a very challenging year, uncertain information, unpredictable, COVID-19, things go up and down. So it's been a challenging situation to even to try to forecast a budget for a school district and try to come up with a budget that would help the district moving forward in the midst of all of these challenges. But before we go ahead and start with the presentation, I actually wanted to cover the item related to the CSBA Legislative Action Week that is coming very quickly here. And there are, my understanding is that CSBA is going to lobby or focus on 5 key components, and I wanted to address those components from the district perspective, as well as ask the board to try to add other components that I believe is of interest of the district. The first one, which is from CSBA, is increasing the base local control funding formula. And this is actually a bit of David. If you go to his office, he will show you the little amount of the base dollars that we receive. So this is something that is important to address to make sure that the district meets its own fiscal obligations. And this is not only for our district, it's all for all the districts in California, as they are receiving a small amount of dollars for the base grant to cover all of the obligations like labor, salaries, insurance, utilities, and so forth. So this item is very important. The second item is school employer pension relief. We're going to be touching based on that. Basically, Governor Brown and following Governor Newsom, they have been attempting to draw down the increase or the escalation in the cost of employer contribution to the pension fund by adding some dollars into that pension fund and reducing that increase from one year to another. However, in the last budget proposal by Governor Newsom, he's really not putting any money for that. And you will see in our slides that the increases in employer contribution from this year to next year and following years are extensive and will be providing a burden to school districts overall. So this is something obviously we recommend to push that. The next item is actually an item that we plan to discuss in the budget build-up for the presentation, which is COVID average daily attendance relief. So if you recall, what's really happening here is that school districts, due to COVID-19 and lack of in-person attendance or relying on online, they have seen a drop in attendance, and therefore there is a relief this year. So the concern is that by next year you have a 2-year drop, which they call it the cliff. And Governor Newsom tried to address that in his budget, January budget. However, there are other variations to it. So it provides some relief, what he suggested for, but I believe this is something that we can push for to ensure that school districts, including our districts, are covered in that regard due to the attendance decline. And you are aware, obviously, with the increase in COVID-19 cases and testing and all of this stuff, that really impacted the school district attendance. So that's something that we would appreciate if the board members address that as well. The next one is home-to-school transportation funding. And that is actually, I believe, is requested because of the introduction of preschool that Governor Newsom is suggesting. But I think this is actually something, it's an opportunity for school districts, high school districts like us, to address the need for home-to-school transportation, additional home transportation funding. We have this presentation last board meeting related to the transportation challenges that we have in the area. And one of the issues that really come out, is obviously safety of safe routing to schools. But also we have situations like South Monte High School, where the majority of the population live on the opposite side of the freeway. And we believe that home-to-school transportation that was pretty much eliminated outside of special education due to the lack of funding can be addressed if the state is supporting that regard. So this is something that actually should be pushed for, not only for preschoolers or elementary schools, but also for high school districts or high schools or middle and high schools, especially when the boundary of the school is large, significantly large, and alternative transportations are not available, as well as the safety of the students walking to schools. The final item for CSBA is basically pushing for election recall reform, as well as having a Senate Bill 1061 to address election reform for school districts. I believe this is something I'm sure that our board will support. But there are 2 items that they did not really include, and I would like to appreciate if our board members who will participate in the legislative action is to champion and address that for our district. The first one is the special education funding. Special education, especially in our district, this is the only segment that is continuing to grow, while the district overall decline by an average of 2 to 3% every year. The special education, it's very important, but it's very costly and very expensive. The district recover probably about 30% of the cost of providing special education. All attempts to address this in a sincere manner is not really taking place. The federal government is not living up to their commitment of 40% of funding for that regard. So I believe it's an opportunity, especially with the additional funding that the state is receiving, is to address the special education funding at this time. The last item is an item that we're going to be covering in the budget session, and it's a 10% maximum reserve requirement that will be starting next year. I believe this is very dangerous for school districts to limit their reserve to only 10%. That's like a month spending, and it's very challenging to manage, especially cash flow and other things, when you only have 10% of the funding to cover unpredictable situations. I know that this is triggered due to the fact that there have been that all the requirements have been met, including fulfilling the rainy day fund for schools, which is about, I believe it's close to $10 billion. And $10 billion is very little. If there is a reverse in the state economy, the $10 billion is not going to protect the districts. What protected the district before, in the years before, it's their fiscal solvency and responsibility, and having a reserve that would allow them to address the uncertain situations. The average reserve for a school district right now is 20% or more. Our district has higher reserve at this point in time. And I think that's actually an insurance to address economic uncertainty and that I believe will face ahead. So that's basically where my recommendation about CSBA legislative action. Any questions?
Mr. Diaz,
or
if I
feedback?
may. Thank you, Mr. Altar. So you'll be happy to know that every single one of these topics have been touched upon in sessions that we had with Assemblywoman Calderon yesterday and Assemblywoman Rubio today. In fact, Assemblywoman Rubio, being that she was a former school board member and a former educator herself, was very supportive of all of the asks that we had about, LCFF base grant increase, employee pension liability, the COVID ADA relief, home to school transportation funding, election reform. We talked at length about that today. And yesterday in conversations with Assemblywoman Calderon, one of our colleagues at Albany City School District did discuss special ed funding, particularly putting it in context of although we have declining enrollment in our school districts, we have an increase in the number of special ed students. So that was definitely discussed. And today with Assemblywoman Rubio, we did talk about the coming reserve cap, particularly what the legislature is thinking of doing because they've reached the cap or are about to reach the cap on the rainy day fund as well. We did discuss, limitations placed on us by the GAN limits as well. So we have touched upon all this and we definitely will be following up with them to continue to advocate on behalf of our school district. But thank you for highlighting those items.
You're welcome. Any other comments?
No, Padilla?
Nothing at this time. Thank you, Mr. Alatar.
Thank you. All right, getting into the presentation. So the presentation is actually twofold. One of them is the first one is the second interim, and the second part is a presentation about how to build the budget. We figure out to approach the budget session by actually talking about how to build a budget like the second interim. As you recall, back in June 2020, we had a budget session, and we cover many of the items related to how to read the budget and so forth. I did create the same binder to Ms. Torres Segrist to make sure that she has a copy, but you should have a copy of that binder. We have a binder for tonight budget study and session, but we're going to be touching on a couple of items in the budget. One of them, obviously, is the 10% maximum reserve requirement, as well as the ADA, the decline in enrollment, and the impact of COVID-19 on that. So we'll try to go quick as much as we can here. So you know the cycle, obviously, that we have. We're down there in the second interim financial report. That's an adjustment from the first interim, obviously first interim adjustment from the budget that the board adopted back in June. And then you see the cycle as well. We're moving forward with preliminary LCAP budget that will take place in April. The May revise come from the governor. That we use in order to come up with our budget. And then the board adopted in June and so forth. So we're always busy trying to meet those reports. Obviously, you also have estimated actuals, unaudited, unaudited. The difference between estimated actual and the budget is just a forecast. You know, we're not obviously magicians to kind of figure out and make sure that we're going to be exactly come up with exactly like within the budget. But what we include in the budget, especially our district here, is that we're fiscally responsible, and we try to be conservative by including all the expenses that we expect to have, and then also including only the revenues that we're sure that we're going to receive. So sometimes, because of that, you're always going to have adjustment to make in the first interim and second interim, and then obviously the final report with the estimated actuals will be obviously the actual numbers that we end up with. I'm sorry, going to the wrong direction here. All right, so the ongoing impact of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, the war in Europe right now. So there is still, COVID-19 is not away. You know, the news actually we have in China, they have lockdowns, cities locked down. So, and my understanding is there are actually variants that are out there as well. But the impact on us is that, on the state, is that, you know, it's really impacting the lower and middle income earners much harder than the rest. The rest may look like they are recovered. Tourism and hospitality sectors seem to be recovering. We believe that the general fund revenues that for the state is strong, while it's strong, but it is anomaly. And we believe that as things move forward, we really don't know how it's going to be shaping. And then obviously you have the inflation due and the supply chain issues. I can tell you we have some construction projects that have been delayed for months and months because of the lack of materials, and then the labor shortage and all of this stuff. And then finally, the war in Europe, I believe that will have a short and long-term impact on the economy here. It's already been hitting the inflation hard, so inflation is actually going even higher. But the reality is that the last report showed that the state is having a surplus of almost $46 billion for next fiscal year. Now, this obviously did not include the impact of the war in Europe, but we believe that the numbers will be high. There's obviously significant increases projected for two of the big three taxes, the personal income tax and the sales tax. As I mentioned, Governor Newsom basically used some of this fund in order to increase significantly the amount of dollars for the rainy day fund, including the public school system stabilization account, to the maximum amount that was, I believe that's about $10 billion. There is obviously uncertain situation at this point in time. It's very unpredictable to see what's going to happen with COVID-19. Hopefully it's moving in the right direction. Inflation is a major issue. Everybody is talking about it. It's over 7% now. Last number that I did here, it's like 7.5% or something like that. It's unheard of. I mean, I came to this country in 1982, and at that time the inflation was that level, but never been to that before. And then the Federal Reserve increased the rate today, actually, and we do not know what the impact on the stock market. And the reason we're concerned about the stock market, because that's where most of the revenues that come to the state is through the stock market. So if the stock market takes a dip, that actually impacts impact the state budget and thus impact us as well. So summarizing here basically is that, we actually appreciate the fact that Governor Newsom is recognizing some issues that our school districts in California are facing. He's really avoiding new initiatives. This budget, he's building his budget based on critical investment and to address varied student needs, and as well as he's attempting to address the decline in student enrollment and helping school district to weather that situation. It's all-time high, the Proposition 98, and he's proposing over $16 billion in new revenues for K-14 education. The obvious situation here is that it's triggering the maximum reserve for school districts, and we will be talking about our staff recommendation of how to address this for next year. Future issues to consider. Most of these issues we have discussed with the Csba legislative action week. Most of the issues really, the declining in enrollment, we anticipate the declining to actually increase to 3 to 4%. We're projecting more than 2% actually. But overall, that's actually the decline in the state. The student attendance rate is a big issue for us, obviously. Escalation in the benefits cost due to COVID-19, we believe it's going to be higher than 5%. Someone will have to pay for all of the cost of COVID-19, workers' comp, and things of that nature. So we're probably going to see a higher cost in benefits impacting the district, and since we do not have a hard cap, it will be impacting our general fund. Escalation in cost of the liability insurance, I can tell you that it's going to be over 10%. And it's escalating. There are a couple of issues with liability insurance. First, obviously, is the SAM claims, the sexual misconduct claims that basically goes back to how many years before, and the deadline to submit is a claim is approaching December 30th, the end of this year. So we anticipate a higher number of claims coming into the GBAs, as well as the cyber insurance is becoming harder and harder to even find a good cyber insurance with all of the concern that insurance companies have. So the unfortunate news that you probably know that back in 2010-11, the district was over 10,000 students enrollment. And now we stand to be slightly over 8,000. And according to Davis demographics, we will be dipping below the 7,000 by 24, 25, or 25, 26. We continue to decline by an average of 200 students. We anticipate the decline will be increasing a little bit to 250 to 300 students average. We can see that in the elementary schools enrollment. That's what we get. And I think we have to acknowledge that the issue is not because students are not going to the district here and going somewhere else. We simply do not have the birth rates to support a steady number of students. And we also have little immigration to the area. And with that, there is also some reverse immigration from the state and from expensive areas to cheaper areas, whereas in Arizona, the high desert, I think even the high desert is becoming very expensive. Utah, as far as Idaho and Oregon, I mean, you go to those places, you find more Californian than the locals there. So I think we need to acknowledge that this declining enrollment is something we have to face, and we have to be prepared how to address it. So these are the assumptions that we included in the second interim, and I'm going to go quickly through them and then give it to David so he can finish this presentation. You can see the supplemental concentration funding projected at $33 million, and you may say why it's going up. And the reason for that, because obviously the adjustment of the supplemental and concentration, the concentration was increased from 55% to 65%. So we're getting more money for students who are over 55% in analysis. The step and column increase for employees effective July 1. Every year we have the step and column, and we account for that. It's normally between 1 and 1.5% increase in CalSTRS and CalPERS. You can see the numbers adjusted up, and those are increases from the total dollars that the district pays. So just to give an idea, the CalPERS increased from 20.7% to 22.9% next year. That's a $500,000 increase in if we have the same number of classified employees. That number, 22.9%, is expected to go all the way up to 27% in the next 3 years. So the numbers continue to grow. Obviously, we have to spend 3% from our general fund on restricted maintenance, routine maintenance, as well as the mandated block grant is now funded at $63.17. By the way, this is not like they're giving us additional money. This is really, we have to provide these programs. I think the total of these programs is something like 46 or something like that, And we have to provide these programs, and instead of actually paying us for this program, for the cost, they basically give per ADA a number. And that number is adjusted now to $63.17. And with that, I'll give it to David so he can finish the second term presentation.
All right, thank you. Hey, good evening, members of the board and Dr. Zuniga. So the multi-year projections, so we're continuing with the 100% implementation of the LCFF funding model. So that number that we just talked about, that 33 million, will continue on. Funding for the unduplicated pupil counts is what that's based upon, and the proportionality. The increased contributions for restricted maintenance, you said at 3% out of the general fund. We're also projecting an additional 5% increase through the years for utilities, property and liability, health and welfare benefits, and frankly, that numbers might even go higher. Some interfund transfers, that is the funds 14 and 21, we have the solar project payments we need to make, so some of the money comes out of the general fund to pay for that. And then we also have our deferred maintenance that we're covering with those transfers. Whoops, sorry, the other way for you, pardon me. So those major assumptions, looking at it in terms of numbers spread out over the next 3 years, or the remainder of this year, the next 2 years rather, translates out that way. So our COLA is the big one, that's staying at about 5% for the remainder of this year, next year. We've heard some numbers still being bounced around, so we'll see what happens when the proposed, the May revise is given to us in a few months. The projected enrollment, of course, shows that decline with the estimated ADA on top of that. The unduplicated pupil count remains about the same, a very slight drop. And then our funded ADA, we're using that figure that is based upon our, usually we have the higher of the current or the previous year, and there's discussion about that even changing. But for now, that's what we're projecting on, that it's going to be declining. We get lottery money in 2 flavors. Essentially, it's unrestricted and restricted. The restricted portion is for instructional materials, and the unrestricted, we use most of that for covering teacher salaries here. The certificated FTEs has been holding at that number, and then, as Mr. Altar pointed out, those are the employment rates and how they're going to change over the next few years. So looking at it in a chart, and again, in a dollar way, the revenue comes out at, in sum, I'm just going to jump right down to the lower right number, thinking of all the slides you have to go through, is 187,640. And the reason for that, for the most part, if you look at that restricted column, that second row, federal revenue. So this was the year when a lot of the COVID relief money came into our accounts. That number is about, usually it's around 6 million, to give you an idea. So that is, throwing that number, the bottom line number figures way higher than normally. The other state revenues, that's a little bit higher than what we expect. Normally that's around 8, so that's about 5 million higher. And the other local revenue is about the same and holds. Our contributions, we were talking about special ed contributions a while ago. That figure in the bottom row there, 14 million for this year, that's nearly 50% of what it was 4 years ago. So I think it'll hit 50% higher than what it was in 2017 when we come into next year. Those costs are really going up, but that's what it is, you know, we're projecting out for the remainder of this year. The expenses, we have projected more expenses this year. Again, I'm going to go to that number in the lower right hand, the 202 million, almost 202,600,000. And again, that's because we're spending down that the federal money that we have. We have a couple of years to spend most of that down. 2 years from today, we've already had a couple of years to spend some of it, but we're still working that down. So that's why we're showing more expenses than we are revenues. The overall numbers there are in that restricted column are the ones that are really high because, again, since we have a lot more federal money and a lot more state money, that's where most of those expenses are going to appear. As we look at the contributions, that one number I mentioned about special ed, so I've got it right now at this 9.6 million just for special ed, and it's holding for the next year based upon some preliminary numbers we have. So those will still be refined as we get closer to the end of the year and then work into the budget period. We're projecting that will be up by 23, 24, and again, if numbers go up in the 22, 23 projection, that figure should go higher. The ongoing and routine restricted maintenance, so that's the 3% that we're required to maintain out of the budget, and then we have, I've kept that up there. We have the instructional materials program, which used to exist before the LCFF, so that was folded into the LCFF, so it doesn't exist as its own program anymore. All told, 14 million this year that'll be going to other programs within the general fund. That is moving from unrestricted to the restricted side. So in sum, this is what we're looking at when, at the end of the year, this is what I'm projecting when all things are said and done, that if you look at that net number, so the unrestricted, we'll be spending a little over, or almost 9 million over of what we've taken in, again, because part of that is we've got a little buildup of general fund money because we've been using so much of the COVID relief money. We've been working that down. And then the net will be a decrease on the restricted side also for a sum total of almost 15 million. Leaves the beginning balance, or rather the beginning balance is what we started this year at, and the projected ending is what we expect to be, or what I expect to be at the end of the year. Now, remember, this is just through data we had through January 31st, and most likely all that federal money I mentioned a while ago, that $48 million money, we probably won't spend down, but I just don't have a good idea of what that's going to, I don't have an exact figure just yet. Consequently, I'm still showing that we're going to have a projected balance of 3.6, but I'm sure that number is going to be really high.
So if I may,
yes.
if I want to add something here. Okay. These numbers are not going to take place. The reason for this is that all the restricted dollars that you have there, the federal dollars. First of all, we don't receive those dollars. We don't have those dollars. Okay, we only receive the dollars that we
reimbursement.
It's a reimbursement. So, but we put it in the budget, and we assume that we're going to be spending it all this year because there is no other option at this point in time to do it. So I can tell you that these numbers are, especially in the restricted column, is not going to take place like this. It's almost impossible to predict how to do it. So the only way to do it is just to account for it all, even though you don't receive it, till you spend it, and then you also expense it all in the same year. So you can actually have those numbers kind of addressed in that situation. So.
Correct. So what it is in the year that we receive the money, or that we expect to receive it, we'll budget for it, and then what will happen by the end of the year, we'll do our actual or unaudited actuals. The auditor will look at it, and then we'll see what that number really is. So we have to budget it in the year we receive it, is really what he's saying. Consequently, there's so much of it that, and we know we have a couple of years to spend it, we know that it's not going to all get spent down. As we move into the next one, so the unrestricted general fund, the adopted versus projected. So we started the year with that first-hand column, or the second column, the adopted ones. And then as we moved into the projected, this is what's really transpiring through January 31st. So we're spending down, if you look at that total components of the ending balance, we're spending down a little bit faster than what we had in the adopted, and that's because a little bit more has actually come in. So over the multi-year, the unrestricted general summary, looking at the in a more of a summary term, we got what our revenue will mean on the bottom line. So our revenue's there on the top line, and this is over the next 3 years what we're projecting. And this is unrestricted revenue. That's what you don't see that big number because that's restricted monies. Our contributions there, we showed that a little bit earlier, and then the net effect there. Next year, I think we just might be balancing out, but again, we've still got some numbers coming in. We'll know more come May. But we'll be spending our balance down. Part of that is because we're required to with that cap, and then we'll be discussing again later on in the budget session just how some of that other will be used. So the COVID relief money, that unrestricted money, so these are all the restricted funds that we've been getting. I'd say pay attention to that right-hand column so you get an idea of when the dates that they've got to be spent down. The allocation column, of course, that's what was allocated for the district, and as Mr. Alatar noted, that money isn't here, it's just allocated. As we spend, we bill for it, and then we get reimbursed. The balance of some of those will show nothing because those ones we've completed already. We've already spent that money down. Some of the others are already low. If you look at that first one, the ESSER 1 relief money at 114. Again, this was January. We're in March. I know now that that money's gone. Same thing with the 700, or I'm sorry, about 1, 2, 3, 4 further down, the 196, 95. That's as good as gone. So we're working through that, and those target dates were, of course, September of 22. So we're ahead of schedule on that, which is good. If we can get out in this year, it'd be great. And then we're moving into the next ones that have the expenditure date of September 2023. So besides our general fund, we have other programs and other funds in the district, and adult debt is there. So they start off with that $11 million beginning balance. They're going to end at about 9.5, and essentially you read down through that list. I don't want to take up too much of your time on that, but the cafeteria fund and so on. One of the big numbers you'll see there, of course, is the building fund, and that has to do with the bond money that was a series that was released and is going into that fund. So that explains that big jump. The rest of those are really about the same as what they started at, not too big of a well, when you look at it in huge numbers, not too big of a jump there. And none of them are red. Good news. We'd love to hear that. So all that, again, is at this point, we're projecting that out, but there's still a lot coming up that may change. We'll know more with the governor's budget. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mr. Elatar to start talking about that uncertain road ahead.
Sure. Well, I mean, we did cover most of the issues in here, you know, and that's basically where we have to be addressing in the next couple of years, not only our district, but all the school districts in that regard. We don't believe that there will be more stimulus dollars coming to, you know, there's, you know, for our district, $56 million. You know, we believe it's obviously sufficient to address it. The key here is, it's not like we have to spend the money. We're going to be spending the money, but how are we going to be spending the money? How are we going to be taking advantage of those dollars in order to support the education and also in order to support the district challenges that we'll be facing in the next couple of years? That will be the key for the success for the district. The inflation impact is, we can see it. You know, the cost of everything is going up. I can tell you, I was just like having a discussion with Dr. Zuniga. I mean, we're talking about graduation, for example, and graduation preparation for the school, all of this stuff. The stuff that the thing that we rented last year, it's almost double cost-wise at this point. So just give you an idea that the inflation is not necessarily just 5 or 6 or 7%. In our district, there are some items that almost double. Cost of construction is going up like crazy. We had to adjust our budget again and again and again for some of the projects that are about to be bid. It's very noticeable, and it's not just a 5, 6, 7%. Long-term COVID-19 impact on the economy. Decline in enrollment is the big thing, and I think we need to start talking about staffing in the district, because we cannot sustain staffing in the same level as we were like 9,000 or 10,000 when there will be a decline and steady declining going on every year. Cost for benefits is an issue. Insurance under COVID-19, unfunded mandates. The base grant is a big deal. Okay, so you need to imagine this. The base grant is $82 million. Out of that $82 million, $14 million going for contribution. That leaves you $67 million to cover most of the labor in the district, to cover liability insurance, to cover utilities, to cover this and that. It's not sustainable. Okay. Has to be some adjustment to the staffing level in order for this to work. And we recommend that base grant need to be adjusted up in order to allow school districts to be able to provide the education, the learning experiences that it's supposed to be. And adjusting to the 10% maximum, that is for us is a dangerous zone. We will be talking about the commitment of the additional dollars over the 10%, how we're going to be addressing it. You will see how our obligations, long-term obligations in the district, and why it's important that the school district have a larger reserve. All right, so we're done with the second interim presentation, and we're going into the budget study or the budget session. So we have few slides for the budget session, but I wanted to reference the book that you have in front of you here. And in that book, we actually divided it to, first of all, review of district funds. And this is basically all the district funds that we have in the district. Now I want to go to this slide here. You have this slide in your, you have this slide in your binder, and it does show what the type of funds that we have. So the way to read this is that most funds are restricted, with the exception of general fund, which has unrestricted and restricted. The other funds are restricted to their fund source. So you have, and this is, by the way, in the last two columns there showing the ending balance, anticipated ending balance by the end of this fiscal year for the unrestricted and restricted, as David shared with you. You also see the type of funds we have, Fund 8, which is the student activity. Obviously it's restricted, and we have about $785,000 at the ending balance. Adult ed, very healthy ending balance. The budget for the annual budget for adult ed is about 10 to 11 million every year. But they have a reserve of almost $10 million. So they are really in a very good shape. The only challenge with adult ed, and I can share this with you, is there is a major decline in enrollment for adult ed. I had even a discussion with the adult ed principal, administrator, and I did suggest for her that she really needs to start doing advertisement, extensive advertisement and marketing for her school, using some of the funds that we have here in order to increase enrollment. And the reason for that, not just only obviously serving the community, because they provide excellent programs, as you know, but also they are part of the consortium. And if they continue to show declining enrollment, the dollars will be shifted from them to the other members in the consortium. So it's very important to show that we're spending the money that we're receiving for adult ed. I'm working with the principal to find ways to spend the money this year. But we need to address the enrollment, obviously. Fund 13 is the cafeteria, $1.2 million and about $4 to $5 million total budget. That's about 20%. That's a very good ending balance or reserve. However, there are pressure on that budget, on that fund. You have a shortage of supplies, you have high cost of commodity, and high cost of labor and shortage of labor. You add all of this up, and I can tell you that If we're not very careful, that reserve can go in a hurry. And when that happens, the general fund will be asked to contribute to that fund. So we're watching that very closely. Deferred maintenance, Fund 14. I believe that we need to continue funding deferred maintenance from general fund. It's actually one of the options for committing the additional dollars over the 10% is Fund 14. So that's something that allow us to address issues like deferred maintenance, plumbing issues, roofing, all of this kind of stuff. And then the special reserve, Fund 17, we built that reserve with the board approval back in 2017 in order to address the increases in the employer contribution for retirement, and we built it to be close to $4.3 million. The thing here is that the legislators included Fund 17 as part of the 10%. So we will have to commit these dollars to the same purpose, but we have to commit it. And David will be talking about that later on. Fund 20, this is actually the post-employment benefits, and we have $3 million. We haven't touched that $3 million for many years. The reason why, because we pay from general fund every year. We pay about $700,000 every year, David, something like that. This is for those who retire all the way to 65, and they receive benefits from the district. The problem is that the long-term obligation for the district exceeds $33 million. This is one of the places that we can commit dollars in order to cover over the 10%, in order to cover any reserve over the 10%. So Fund 21, general fund, and you can see it's very healthy, but I can tell you with the increases in the costs that we're facing almost every week or every month, we get increase in estimates of the cost of the project that we're working on. That money is going to go in a hurry. We had to adjust, for example, the track and field for Mountain View High School and Arroyo High School. Right now, both of them combined will be $25 million construction and a $30 million total cost of projects. So when you have increases like this, that would be impacting other things. However, I'm going to actually talk about it when I get there. Fund 25, developer fees. We use developer fees as much as we can for new construction. It has to be used for new construction, and we have few new construction projects. Obviously, Ledesma, we used most of those dollars for Ledesma. We also have new constructions like the Granada Transition Center, the additional building. So any dollars we get for developer fees, we will be using it for that purpose. Fund 35. So Fund 35 is the state matching fund. And we already established eligibility for all of our modernization projects. And we have a total of about $25 to $30 million that we're going to get from the state if when we submit those projects to the state, to not the DSA, I'm sorry, OBSC and the State Allocation Board. The challenge is that the state doesn't have money, even though the governor put some money to cover some of the projects that are already been submitted. So what end up happening is that the district will have to use a budget, a bridge finance, mainly would be Fund 21, the bond, to cover the state matching fund till the state are able to to put another bond in place, and then we can get the money like 2-3 years after. Okay. One of the ways that you can also address this issue is that the 10% issue is that you can, Fund 35, you can actually put the state matching fund in from the anything over the 10%, knowing that the money will be coming later on. So you just want to keep that in mind, because some of the projects that will be starting very soon, we will be applying for the state matching funds. Fund 40, special reserve fund for capital outlay projects, and I believe that we contribute regularly in that fund, and that's also another fund that can be used for commitment. So I'm going to go quickly with these slides here, because I think there are lots of stuff that David will be talking about at the end. So we talk about inflation, and you can see the inflation is growing up almost on a daily basis. This is how we build our budget. So we build the budget, the LCFF, you have the base grant, and then you have the grade span adjustment. For us, it's 9 to 12, 2.6%. And then you have unduplicated viewable percentage, and we'll go over those percentage. And then you add the COLA, estimated COLA, 5.33%, that's for next year. Supplemental and concentration grants, obviously, is based on the proportionality for that. And as we mentioned, it's $33 million for this year. So to put it in a table, that's exactly what you see here. So the GSA is the grade span dollars that we receive, $268 per ADA. The base grant is for 9 to 12 is $9,800. COLA added $522. You add that up, $10,324. Look at the column on the right-hand side, because that represents the district. And then you get the big thing here is obviously is supplemental and concentration. You see 20% for the total unduplicated count, 21.9, and then 65% concentration for anyone who is unduplicated count over 55%. So we get an additional almost $6,900 per student for anyone over 55% number. So, and then building the budget with assumptions. All of these assumptions we kind of like almost talk about. So this is actually giving an idea of how we build our budget. We include these adjustments on annual basis. Sometimes it goes over the 5% or 3%, depending on what we project that would be. As we mentioned, supplemental concentration is about $33 million for 21-22. Step and column is about 1.25%. David, something like that? Okay. It's normally higher for certificated than classified. And one of the reasons for that, because it's certificated, it's annual increases. There's annual increases in step and column, where classified, it goes every 3 years after the first 5 years. The increases in CalSTRS and CalPERS, we include those numbers. Contribution to the routine maintenance or restricted maintenance, as well as the mandated block. Move forward here. So this is actually a slide we also talk about again. This is how we build the budget. So we look into the multi-year dashboard that either mainly school services or Department of Finance, and look into what they project for every year for COLA. 5.07% for 21-22. Next year is 5.33%, and then they're projecting about 3.6% for the next 3 years. You can see the escalation in CalSTRS and CalPERS. Now, unemployment insurance is something that is becoming an issue, because not last year, the year before, it was 0.05% for a long, long time. And because of COVID-19, the unemployment insurance was projected to be about 1%, and then the governor reduced it to 50%, 0.5% last year, and he's recommending or anticipating that it's going to continue to be 0.5% for next year, and it's going to go down to 0.2% for the years after. But that's the impact of COVID-19. So that's basically give you an idea. It's an increase of 0.5% for the entire labor amount. That's significant. So if we have a labor amount of about $80+ million, 0.5% is $400,000 increase than what it used to be before. So just keep that in mind. And this is the enrollment decline in the district. You can see that we anticipate that our ADA by 2023, 2024 may actually go down to about 7,000. Our ADA to enrollment, we actually project around 95% every year. We anticipate that will continue that way. The table in the bottom there is actually, I took it from school services, and it shows that the impact of the declining enrollment on a district is that when you, and the COLA. So in a district, District 1 and District 2. So District 1 is a district that is not declining enrollment. The COLA, 5%, it will be actually the impact of it is 5%. A school district that is declining, 2.5% declining every year. District 2, the COLA equates to, the 5% COLA equate to increase of 2.375%. And that's one of the reasons sometimes is that, you know, in negotiations, for example, we look into this and say, well, you know, hey, COLA is covering so many other things. But also, because of the declining enrollment, and if we're not adjusting the staff accordingly, the COLA impact is less than half of what initially allocated. So that's actually an example of how the impact of declining enrollment on the COLA. And these are the assumptions that we take. Just to take an example, we already gave you this example before in the second interim, but this is what we use basically in order to build our budget. We look into all of these components, and we included in there in order to come up with the final total expenditures. With that, I want to actually, you know, get David to talk about the cliff, or do you want me to? Okay, I'll go ahead and okay. So the first issue that we see in the budget this year that's different than the year before is the ADA cliff. And the reason that you have the ADA cliff is because of COVID-19, the governor gives the school districts this year, they give them a pass, basically, like waiving the adjustment. So normally, school districts, the declining enrollment, they have a year to adjust. So we end up using last year number for this year. Okay, so that's basically normally the situation. With the governor giving a pass for last year, and now we're looking into next year. Next year will be a cliff of 2 years combined in the reduction in ADA. Okay, so it's double the whammy kind of situation. So that's basically what you can see here is that what they call the cliff. And I'm going to skip this one. So this is actually an example of a school district that is 10,000 students, very similar to us. And basically 2021 artificially ended up being 10,000 because of the BAS. And then in 21-22, they declined to 9,500, 9,250. That's basically how it would be. You see the cliff happening. But what the governor is suggesting is a 3 years rollover of the numbers. And therefore, the right table show that instead of the 9,500, the school can report 9,833. I believe this is as alternative method, so it actually continues if, for future. So, but there are lots of other options out there to address this. The concern, after all, is that school districts are declining further than what they used to be. At the end of the day, it's going to catch up with them. So this is just a matter of like sliding into it. So this is our main concern here, especially for the next year. The second one is the reserve cap. And as you can see, the district, the state is reaching all the requirements. And now the 10%, the cap for the school district using assigned, unassigned ending balance of general fund and special reserve. When the state reserve reaches 3%, which is going to reach 3% with the amount of dollars that the governor is including in the state reserve. And therefore, there are some exemptions to this, like school district size, and I think you also can apply for a 2-year waiver or something like that. At the end of the day, we really have to face it. So those are all the check marks here mean that the state believes that we met the requirement, we're going to be meeting the requirement next year. Those are the requirements for the 10% reserve to be triggered, and everyone basically say that we'll be matching, getting that. I'm going to skip this one here. So, we're from school services, I use this here. So school services basically trying to say, how can school district live with that? Okay, obviously we'd like not to have that trigger for next year, but we have to plan for it. And those are some of ideas that school services are suggesting. Those are some of the ideas that we will be recommending to the board. So one option is a waiver from the county for 2 consecutive years in 3-year period. Another option is commit resources rather than assign, and then move resources to other funds like Fund 14, Fund 20, Fund 35, Fund 40. We did mention all these funds here. So basically, we commit those funds to those resources so we can actually address get into the 10% requirement. And then contribute more to restricted programs like routine restricted maintenance. Now, the 3% is, we believe it's sufficient, the 3%. And are we getting, sometimes it's hard to get to that number, and we have to move dollars in there in order to meet the minimum requirement. That's correct, David? Yes, the 3%. Not the 3% reserve, is the maintenance. Yeah. So we're not really sure about the final option as something that will, for the district will work for us. So this is the big one. Okay, so what's our fiscal obligations? The first one is, or the big one, is really the OPEB liability, which is the unemployment, not the unemployment, I'm sorry, the post-employment benefits liability. And you can see here is that the accumulated long-term obligation for the district is $31 million. So that fund, Fund 20, can be used because you have an extensive obligation to cover that. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Anything you want to add, David, to this?
Why this number jumped a lot this year was, I'm going to use the term you may have heard, the big quit. So we've had more people went into, left the district and retired before the retirement age. Consequently, those people moving into the system, we had been seeing this number actually go down coming into the pandemic, but it jumped up, it took a big jump in the last 2 years, so that's why that number is going up. We're not sure if that's going to continue either, so this is another thing that will come into some of the projections that in an actuarial study, which we've included in that binder for you. But that's really what's contributed to that. And then it depends on what the federal rate is that they mentioned, you know, on the municipal index. That'll go into that calculation too. That's just a little bit more info for you on it.
I think also it's important to note that we have a situation here where we're going to have to address staffing. So one of the ways to address staffing is, you know, encourage some of the district employees to retire and retire early. So that number, I believe, is going to go up. Our obligation is going to go up because of the fact that will be some retirement. And the reality is that COVID-19 have really changed the mind of many people. There are lots of people who are never really thought about retirement, who are actually start to retire because of COVID-19. So we'll see those numbers going up.
But just so that it's clear, we're basically getting battered from both ends. We're seeing decline in enrollment, so we're going to have to look at our staffing levels, and we really need folks to retire so that we don't have to RIF anyone. But by them retiring, our pension liabilities continue to increase. So it's not a good situation either way.
Well, I mean, it's really a challenging situation for a school district that's declining enrollment because, you know, on one hand, you really need to reduce your staffing in order to meet operation budget need. And the other hand, if you know, as you encourage employees to retire, especially if they retire earlier than in our situation than 65, some school districts actually cover benefits beyond 65. You know, when they retire, you know, this number going to go up. However, you know, this is the accumulated number. Okay, it's for this to happen. It's mean like, you know, it's not like something the district will have to pay one lump sum. It's basically a long. If you kind of like span it till everybody reaches to 65, this will be your number. So right now we're averaging $700,000-800,000 a year for post-employment. That number is going to go up. So by putting more money in Fund 20, or not putting more money, but basically commit funding to Fund 20, you cover your obligation in that regard, and you have a sense that, you know, and then you may not allocate dollars from general fund anymore. You can spend it from that fund, okay? Or basically transfer money to general fund and then pay it, you know. So it's something that the school district will have to really address, especially if they have higher reserve like our district, to find ways to commit dollars over the 10%. That's basically what we're really talking about right now. This is one of the ways that you can commit the money over the 10%.
Got it. Thank you.
And this is actually more of a study here that shows why is this number going up. So you can see in 2020, June 30th, 2020, the obligation was 28 million and a half, 28 and a half. In 2021, it went up to 31 million. So that long-term obligation is continue to grow with a higher with a higher level or percentage of retirement of employees who are retiring less than 65 years. And then maybe David, you want to talk about that a little bit, because this is our the staff recommendation is about how to commit these dollars and why. So go ahead.
So in our the reserve is part of this, but essentially when we have that ending balance at the end of the year, or bottom line at the end of the year, we have to look at a few things. One of them is, of course, 3% is always set aside for our state requirement for the reserve. So coming into this year, or ending this year, it's going to be about a little over $6 million there. Then we can, you know, assign money, and when we talked about our reserve and having additional dollars above the reserve, Specifically, that was in case of something catastrophic. And where we discussed that hitting a 17% target level, now we're anticipating that, well, we know it's going to, with that reserve cap under that legislation, that we're going to have to get that number down to 10. Consequently, the maximum amount we can put above the reserve is that $14,181,000. So all told, there will be about $20 million that we'll have to use in case something catastrophic hits us. Now, that reserve that we had really helped us during when the pandemic started. It took a while for federal money and state money to flow, and as we pointed out not too long ago, a lot of that is still coming in, but it's through reimbursement. We have to use our own funds first before we get that reimbursement. So having that around, that reserve, is really important for us. It helps us with a lot of things, and if anything catastrophic were to happen, it gives us time to think things out. If we just went in with that 3% reserve, essentially it would give us about 2 weeks, and we'd have to start handing out pink slips. It's not a prudent way to operate. Plus, I think we have a lot of smart people here. The more time we have, the more heads we put together, we can think our way through it. I think it's a much more prudent approach. So our 10% will be built up out of that minimum reserve plus this assigned amount. And that's put in there for those reasons: against declining enrollment, volatility of state revenues. We pointed out early on in this presentation that state revenues or personal income taxes, corporate taxes, and even that is shifting now, and how that the ratio of those two in the state revenues. And then against encroachment, and what I mean by that is when we talk about increasing costs for some of the other programs, like potentially nutrition services, special ed, and so on. So the district, I mentioned earlier that we have, I'm going to go right to that bottom line, was $40 million is what I'm anticipating at this point that we would have left over. Out of that $40 million, again, the 3% and the 7% is going to be put aside for the reserve and our assigned. But then the question is, will that other $20 million? Now, when Mr. Eltar showed that slide that had the picture of the head, the brain, one of the options was to put it into restricted funds. That's really not an option for us because we have so much federal money there. If we put that in to start spending it down, we wouldn't be taking advantage of the federal allocations that are available to us. So it's really not a good option. The other one was we could put it into projects. Some of those projects are probably okay in the short term, but that's an option for us. But not knowing that yet, we can commit it. And that's saying that maybe we'll use it for certain things. And that's what this Fund 01 committed section is. So the first one is S&C. So at this point in time, that's our supplemental and concentration. That is that amount over the base grant that we get per student. Effective this year, that money has to be retained in that project. Consequently, $13 million of that at this point in time, remember this is only through January, would be put aside for that purpose, rolled over into that project next year. Deferred maintenance, if we put about $616,000, what we have in there, and this number, again, any of these numbers could be switched around a little bit except for that S&C one. The OPEB, again, that's the post-employment benefits. We're paying out of pocket, as we saw in the earlier slides, or that pay-as-you-go plan, about $750,000. We expect that'll go up. We can contribute or put aside some of that to help with that payment. The other thing is we talked about school site modifications. So the Fund 35 money where we would initially use our dollars while we're waiting for the state funds, right? So just estimating that we could start off with $1 million per comprehensive high school, I just allocated that bit there. And the last one is capital projects. So if we had other things that we were doing, electric buses or other things that we wanted to modify, big projects, or we could put it aside for that purpose. And that means that if you added the minimum reserve, the assigned amount, and that sum total of $20,116,000, that would hit that total at the bottom and would be okay for the year at this point.
This is just an example to what these numbers could be. But, for example, like the S&C is really what the carryovers S&C. So we really don't know what, at the end of the year, how much of the S&C dollars that will not be spent. So by law, we have to carry over that money. So that's basic. That number could be 13 million, could be 4 million, could be less than that or whatever. The Fund 35 is basically like a bridge finance, which is basically you hold that money to Fund 35, put it in Fund 35, which is the state dollars, till the state dollars come. So that actually helped the district to get that money down the road when the money comes from the state. So it's just a way to put the money there. Deferred maintenance is in a way, is that something that we really have to continue doing because, you know, there is no question that the district buildings are not new. I mean, you know, I can tell you that in the last few weeks, we had plumbing issues in multiple sites that basically impacted operation extensively, you know, but you have to kind of do emergency repairs and things of that nature. We really need to address our infrastructure, facilities infrastructure. We're trying to do it in modernization, but I can tell you that there are some times where there is no ability for us to wait to do it under modernization, and I think that's important for us to do that. Do the roofing, do the plumbing, and things of that nature that would protect the district. The OBIB, you saw the district obligation long-term, $31 million, so it's a good idea to actually add more money into it as that, and maybe, you know, eventually, instead of the general fund paying for it on an annual basis, is that eventually you can use OBIB to transfer money to general fund to pay for it. So that's basically that's the intent of that money, to pay the annual cost. So, I'm sorry?
We could add more money for more electrical buses if we're going to increase the fleet. Would that be an example of committing that
Yes. I mean,
bus fleet to more electrical
yeah,
buses?
these are the options for the district as we see it at this point in time. We just wanted to give you an example of how we're going to be living the 10% maximum, which is something new for all of us. So, and I think with that, we're done with the presentation. So really, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll just add one last thing. We didn't have a slide on it, but in your packets or in your binders, you're going to see 2 pages that will have these diagrams. One of them is a line chart, right? And another one is a segment, right? So in there, what it's going to show you in the first one, it's going to show year by year what we spend per month with the average cost over that period. And you're going to see that with the advance of every year, those lines are going higher and higher. So inflation is kicking in, right? We know that it's a lot. It was 5% this year. We're projecting over 5% in the coming year. So all those commitments would also help to offset those increases that are coming up before we get to it. It's just anticipating a lot of these costs that we'll be hitting, right? So that's just one other factor that you can look at to see how we're actually operating and get a good idea of, you know, what we're recommending for the future. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. So, I you know, if you want us to go and if you have any questions in any one of any part of this, if this book here, would be more than happy to address it. I mean, the book is divided to very similar to what we discussed. There's just obviously more details in it. It talks about the fund summary list projected in by June 30th, 2022, that give you an idea of how healthy the district is. The district is really in very good shape, you know, fiscally. You have balance by fund, and then the executive summary that tells the dashboard that Department of Finance and School Services put, and we normally do not, you know, divert from those numbers. We maintain those numbers unless we know certain situation for our district that we really need to adjust the numbers. And then we make this adjustment for the expenditures based on the historical trend and also based on what we think the impact would be. So for the insurance world, for example, we know that it's very tight. You know, I can tell you that there are some insurance companies that do not actually deal with California anymore. So the cost is escalating up. You know, the claims are, the numbers are higher, the claims amount, the settlements are higher, so we know that this is going to be an issue. We're actually looking in MERGE to review options besides ASCIP and other JBAs to ensure that we're getting a good value for the dollar that we spent. You know, especially the fact of the matter is that the school district has a 10-year historical record of high cost and liability. So ASCIP now is switching from dealing with MERGE as a whole and dealing with the members of MERS directly. So we anticipate that cost for the district will be higher because of the first 3-4 years of the 10-year span. That was really difficult for the district. There were so many claims that they end up paying. So we know that this cost will go higher once they treat the district as individual member instead of the JPA.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Elatar and Mr. David Norton for your presentation. I'm going to look to my colleagues here to ask you questions or comments on what you've just presented. I'm going to start with Mr. Padilla and then Mr. Briones and then Sitlali. If you have any questions, please let me know. And Dr. Zuniga as well, if you want to make some remarks, and then I'll go to my colleague here to my right. So with that, Mr. Padilla, do you have any comments or remarks for the gentleman?
Yes. So, Mr. Elatar, try to get into the mind of the governor. Why do you think the governor would make districts at risk, financially? I mean, ultimately, if we're not able to pay our STRS and PERS and, all those funds where we kind of put the money and we get all creative, I see you as a CBO and the director, you guys are scrambling, like, how do we get around this thing that's coming down the pipeline? Well, we can move it to this fund and that fund and this fund. I mean, doesn't the governor have advisors that are going to tell him this? I mean, I'm sure he knows people from school services and the whole, California economy. Because I see you scrambling of like, we could put it here and put it there and hide it here and hide it there and then spend it here. And, you guys, the same thing you're doing, every CBO and director in California is trying to find a way to get around that. So what does the governor gain by, limiting us? I mean, the way I see it is he wants us to use some of our money so he doesn't have to use some of his money. But eventually, if they pass this, we're all going to be an at-risk district that's not going to get a positive certification, which ultimately then, I mean, the state has to help us. We're a public entity. STRS and PERS is kicking our rear end. We got it, and it's unsustainable. So don't you think the governor knows that? So what do you think, if you're in the governor's head, why do you think he would do that to every single public school district in California?
Well, my answer, I'm going to be frank.
Be frank. I like frank. I don't like to beat around the bush. I'm sure you know that.
And this is obviously my opinion. It may not be the same.
It's good because your professional opinion, how many years have you been doing this profession?
I've been doing it for quite some time.
I know, and you're part of all these groups that meets with a bunch of CBOs, all the top heads of many districts. So what you say matters to us as board members that will ultimately take the vote or determine, what's going to happen with our district on whether we do all those things that you're advising us to do of where to put the money. So give us your frank opinion.
Sure.
Frank is good.
So my take on this is that this is really more of a political issue.
Okay.
First of all, this governor was not involved, or at that time was not the governor. It was Governor Brown. And I'm going to talk about the 10% reserve and also talk about the increases in the benefits for employer benefits. So the 10% reserve actually was legislation that was based on in 2014, I believe it's 2014, when they came up with this. And it was really more about negotiation between the governor and the union, who wanted to make sure that school districts are spending their reserve for whatever reasons. So that was something that was known to be addressed between the governor and the unions.
When you say unions, what are you referring to? CTA or all unions?
Teacher union, and to a lesser degree CSEA.
Okay.
But it was put in a situation that everyone said there is no way that all these 4 requirements will take place at the same time. They said that, it was almost created in a way that it will never happen because of those 4 requirement meetings, all the 4 requirements, that this one, the reserve 100%, rainy day full, and all of this stuff. But the day come now, where all of these four requirements
is here now.
Are met.
It's here now.
So what we're dealing with right now is a bad law that was negotiated with the assumption that it will never materialize. Okay, so that's the 10%. So many school districts back then till now had been advocating that this is a bad law, even though it was not applied, but there was a fear that one day it will be applied. And the answer back from the state, it will not happen. Okay, so now that's first item. So the current governor is dealing with it, but I'm not really sure he wants to get to that political situation. And obviously, the governor was recalled before, and his major support are the union. So that's basically the first item. The second item is the benefits and stirs and bursts. The reality is that going back to Governor Davis, when there was surplus dollars in at that point in time, and end up providing extensive changes in the benefit system, and stirs and bursts are not sustainable in the way that they are. The fact of the matter is that you have aging population, they have more retirees than those who are working that put into it.
Right.
So it's like a pyramid scheme. So at one point in time, the stirs and bursts cannot sustain it. Right. Okay, so what ended up happening is that the board for stirs and bursts start realizing that they cannot sustain it, so they had to make adjustment. When I started working in school districts back in early 2000, CSA, the employer contribution for classified employee was 0 at 1 year. Right now, we're looking into 2 more years, it's going to be 27%. Okay, so just to give you an idea that with time, the only option for them was to adjust the percentage up for the employer, and obviously the employee contribution did not go up as fast as the employer, because that's very unpopular, right? To require employees to put more money. What they end up doing too is that they end up creating two types of employees: classic employees and the new employees, in which the new employees pays more and get less benefits. So to contribute more and get less benefits. So you try to adjust it that way. All of these adjustments are not really working, and the only way for them to cover it is increase the employer contribution. Okay? The state contribution stayed the same, but adjusted up one time, because the state does put money, by the way. But the employer contribution continued to go up. The way they dealt with it in the last few years, Governor Brown and Governor Newsom, was to put operational dollars, state dollars, into CalBERS and CalSTRS to slow down the increase. So that's the situation that we're in. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did.
Thank you, Mr. Alatar. Mr. Padilla, any other comments or
No
remarks?
other comments.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Briones?
No further comments or questions from me. Thank you.
Dr. Zuniga or Silali? Hey, Silali, good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Dr. Zuniga, anything you want to remark right now? No, Dr. Zuniga?
Actually, I think I do have a question.
Silali? Yep.
So with the enrollment drops as the years go by, how is that going to affect staffing?
I'm sorry, can you speak?
So with the enrollment dropping for students as the years go by, how do we expect that to affect staffing?
To stop?
The staff.
How's it going to affect staffing?
Staffing. How is that? Okay, so it's definitely going to be impacting staffing, because the declining in students population mean that you eventually need less teachers, less obviously administrators, less staffing overall. So there has to be some adjustment at one point in time, where the numbers will have to be adjusted to meet the student population. How to do it? There are different ways of doing it. Obviously, there is layoff, which is something that we try to avoid. Other is the natural progression of retirement and a freeze on hiring, for example, or only hiring positions that you really need, like if you have a special need, special education teacher shortage, that's probably where you hire. But, so there are some ways to address it. There is also incentives to ask employees to retire early. That obviously costs dollars up front, and that has to be calculated. Figure out if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Zun, got any comments or remarks at this time? Or do you want to hold them for after?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Ms. Torres-Segrist?
I'm very impressed with this on page 8 when the history of enrollment and the P288 on page 8. How come from, where did they get the idea that we are going to lose so many students?
Why we're losing so many students?
Yes, why? It's almost 400 students.
I could respond to that. Within the last couple of years, the studies that we have conducted, the birth rates as of the past 2 decades, have drastically reduced as far as the number of children living in the community as a result of lower birth rates. So as we saw that in elementary schools, we saw that approaching the high school district. Probably the last 6, 7, 8 years that we started seeing that impact that the elementary schools were seeing to decline enrollment. Now we had faced that the last couple of years drastically. Now there could have been other factors. Now obviously predictable as far as the pandemic. Did we lose kids to the pandemic the last 2 years? We were just talking about it this morning about what factors contributed to that. Living in California, living in LA County, you saw what a medium household ranges now to live in LA County, $750,000 for a medium household to live here. That's not including the increase in rental fees for families that live in this community. El Monte is expensive to live in. Even people don't believe that. It is a fact that the rent increase continues to go up and housing continues to be increased. The market is hot, so people are being bought off their rentals. People are moving out to other areas, perhaps further east, to find housing that's less cost for them and their families to make it. So we're seeing a contribution of economics, population decrease as far as birth rates, and housing market right now too. So a lot of factors, not to say the pandemic as well, may have impacted a lot of families living in the conditions that they live in right now.
But this year for 2023-24,
Right.
we're going to lose a lot of students.
Right. And the reason why we do the 7-year projected study is to determine staffing needs, to determine the population of students. We have 5 high schools. It's very difficult to even close a high school in these communities that we serve in too. So thinking about the big picture is how are we looking at that in the future? Is that something we saw what the elementary schools are facing? To 2 major elementary school districts have already closed at least 4 schools in the last couple of years. My city, Monte, just saw that recently now. It's a little bit challenging for high schools. I agree. I think we could all agree on that. But thinking globally is, something that if we continue to see that drop, I counted 325 for next year projected decrease. That's more than even the average that we've seen as well. So the forecast is not good, but there's ways to obviously resolve these by, ensuring that the students that we have now that we keep. And how do we keep that? Better programming, right? More training for our teachers, better instruction, quality, life of this community, services that we provide to our students as well. And that's how we can retain our current students now. I mean, those are just my thoughts, but hopefully I answered your question on that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's it.
That's it?
Yes.
Thank you. For me, Mr. Alatar, I think, from the presentation, what I gathered, I like to categorize things, right? So I heard cost-saving measures, right? And kind of when Mr. Padilla said maneuvering of funds to be creative about how we deal with this situation. Also the revenue side. And then the third bucket, I would say, was like advocacy, right? Like things that we should be doing on an ongoing basis. I think for me, what I would be interested in, and welcome discussion from my colleagues here, is I heard a quite big deal around cost-saving measures. What we can do to save here, or do this, or maneuver here, to be able to do that. And I also heard, what we need to advocate for, maybe indirectly or directly, some of the things that came up for us. Obviously, I think in an ideal world, more funding for the base grant would be wonderful, right? Like that's a wonderful solution for us getting more revenue. But other things that came up for me were advocating for universal healthcare, right? Or a single payer healthcare system, right? So it's not on the employer to provide employer-sponsored health coverage, right? The other thing is advocating around more funding or funding for unfunded mandates, specifically around special ed. Advocating for affordable housing to be developed in our community that's actually going to benefit El Monte families or El Monte School District families to stay in this community, right? And then the other thing too that came up for me is like community land trusts. We should be advocating for more community land trusts so that, folks here actually have a stake in ownership, are able to build wealth, or actually afford to live here, right? And I think for me, what I would be most interested in, and maybe it's in this big binder that you put here before me, but I didn't see it, is coming up with, let's just label it a creative revenue generating strategy. So we already have some things that we're doing explicitly. We have the San Dimas property, and where we have a tenant, right, that's bringing in revenue after all costs are accounted for, right? How can we leverage whatever funds we have to create other revenue generating opportunities? We have a lot of space, we have a lot of facilities. I know that it's going to be, we need to figure out how to best do that with our programming currently, but how can we maximize the use of our facilities for like rentals, parties, sporting events, competitions, whatever that may be. I feel like we can figure that out. Maybe we look at solar farms. How can we sell electricity back to the grid, right? How can we create our own electric charging stations, make a profit out of that? Other things I think, or actually the other thing I was thinking about is maybe we go out or consider going out for another measure to the community to fund what Measure HS isn't funding, right? Doing some polling around that. And so for my colleagues, and what I'm asking here is, if it hasn't been done already, I think I would be most interested in putting together this approach where we can think about how we can create additional revenue for ourselves that's unrestricted, that we can take on. Because we could do all the cost savings all day, right? But that's from a deficit perspective, right? How can we add more money, so that we're able to offer the programs and services at the level and standard that we want to? So that's what I'm thinking about. Is it in the binder already?
Well, it's good thinking because obviously it's you have two things going on here: revenues and expenses. So if you wanna address your spending, you either have to address the spending and reduce cost of spending, or increase your revenue so you can actually meet your obligations. In a way, we've done few things like this. One of them, obviously, is the solar.
Yep.
Project, in which we borrowed money from the federal government, right, actually, and built the solar panels and reduce the cost of utilities. But we're still paying, obviously, the federal government.
Yep.
I don't know if you're aware.
Yeah, I remember through the Krebs funding. Yep.
Aware of the issues that is coming up with
net energy metering and the CPUC ruling and how that's going to affect solar.
The NEM3 and all of the stuff. Yep. So sometimes we try to do that. I mean, the district also purchased a property and
right.
And we're trying to rent the property so it can generate some income and so forth.
Right.
So there are ways of doing this.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that if there hasn't been like an intense focus on, because it's come up, various times through my tenure here, but I think there hasn't been a direct focus on how can we create revenue with our assets that we currently have, or how can we invest to make, because you got to spend money to make money, right? And I think given the scenarios that you just painted for us, right, like we need to generate more revenue. Cost savings is not going to be enough, right, for what we want to do. So I think, you know, I want to hear from my colleagues here about, can we dedicate some time and energy to maybe putting together like again, the label can be creative, out of the box, whatever we want to label it here for other ways to generate revenue.
I agree with you. I mean, you know, any possible ways of increasing revenue, that would be great. I mean, I give you another example of not necessarily increasing revenue, but basically reducing the cost, like battery storage that we're adding. We got
that's the cost savings measure. See,
yes,
so that's the cost.
But it was a revenue added from the grant that we end up using that will help us reducing the cost.
Yeah.
So, you know, because at the end of the day, we're still public agency, and we still have some limitations of how, you know, we're, you know, of how to, we're not in the business of selling and buying and all of this stuff. So,
I know.
So, and there are some limitation in that. So those are the creative ways of basically, or another example, using bond dollars to improve, let's say, lighting and stuff like that to end up reducing the cost on operation. Those are the kind of things that I believe we can do and attainable. But
I would still put those in the cost-saving measures, right?
Yes.
Like of LED lighting. You know, like lavanderias, you know, washing machines at the high schools, you know. I don't know, the measure thing about like bringing another measure forward to voters. I don't know what kind of motivation or encouragement or how that would be received, but, you know. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet now. Mr. Briones or Mr. Padilla.
I just wanted to chime in really quick, your comments regarding, you know, bringing in revenue through additional measures. What we're really touching upon, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but we're talking about like asking the voters to enact a parcel tax, because bond measures can only be used for capital projects. You can't use them for salaries, you can't use them for benefits, but a parcel tax can be used for salaries and benefits. San Marino has a parcel tax.
Arcadia does have.
And Arcadia does as well. They're the only two in the LA County that do. That's something to consider, because if we are looking at additional ways of raising revenue, I don't want to say generating revenue because we're not a business, but definitely raising the revenue that we are able to bring in. We're very, very limited. Obviously, you know, we acquired some property a few years ago, and that's a revenue stream, but it's not a significant amount. The reality is, you know, if we want to fund our schools at a level that is befitting the programs and the quality of life that we want to have for our families, you know, we have to ask them, do you want to fund additional dollars out of your own pocket, at least for the taxpayers within the district? And I think it is a conversation that we need to have, because as Mr. Alatar has shared with us, and as we've seen over the last 15 years, those of us who've been around that long, we've seen the numbers drop precipitously. You know, at the peak, this district's enrollment was, I believe, over 10,000. We're going to be looking at under 7,000 in the next couple of years. It's been a huge drop, and it's going to continue. And if we want to avoid that fiscal cliff, if we want to avoid layoffs, if we want to avoid shuttering programs, you know, if we want to avoid, you know, a financial catastrophe, we do have to look at other sources of revenue. And I think, you know, we're very limited as a school district what it is that we can do. You know, and if we want to look at it equitably, then I think we need to have that discussion. Would a parcel tax be something that we would be supportive of, asking the voters to consider, you know, and then ultimately, you know, placing on a ballot and asking them to support it at that time. So I would be open to having that conversation, with the caveat that still in a pandemic, there's still a lot of financial uncertainties for people in the community, but I definitely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and for me, it's not just, you know, limited to the measure. I think that's just a component of it. I don't, you know, just be one of the potential things for us to consider. Mr. Segrist or Mr. Padilla, you have any?
Yeah, and so, Mr. Briones, who would pay the parcel tax? Who pays the parcel tax?
Property tax owners, like a bond measure.
Okay,
It would be
but
property
I
tax
mean,
owners.
we have all these school districts within this area. We're not a unified school district, right? So every time we pass a bond, everybody has to pay for it, right? If Mountain View School District passes a bond, who pays for that? And then El Monte Union High School District passes a bond, who pays for that? Then we have El Monte City School District, and who pays for that? You know, and then we already know that if I'm a homeowner and I have to pay more taxes and I own some property and I have some investment, I'm going to raise what? What am I going to raise? My rents to the people who I'm renting to. So then in a way, we're exacerbating the problem that we're currently having right now, you know, where people are leaving. And does that make sense? Like, yes, we're trying to find money somewhere, but we're adding to the same problem that we're trying to fix, because our families are going to move out to, where did you say? Idaho, Arizona, San Bernardino, all those places, which then will decrease our average daily attendance. And again, we're back like, hey, state, please increase our base grant. I just think, and I hear what my colleague, Mr. Diaz, is saying. You remember a long time ago when I came back about PARS? Remember PARS? Do you remember that or not?
Yeah, I remember.
Okay, tell me again what the acronym of PARS is. I forget what the company does, but the company comes into school districts, and then they want you to invest some of those dollars that we have in our reserve, right? When I presented that idea to you and to Dr. Zuniga, you guys said, you know, and then you're a very conservative CBO. Would you classify as a conservative CBO? You're not out there like,
in the fiscal
you're not
sense,
out there like,
but
oh
not,
yes,
not in
let's
the,
invest some
not
of
in
the
this,
district
you know,
dollars in something. School districts don't usually invest because we don't want to gamble with the money, with our kids' money, you know? And I still feel that way. I remember when I first came and they did the presentation and they did say, this board can be as conservative with that investment that they make, or this board can be as conservative as they want. It's up to the board to determine, you know, how aggressive you want to be with the investment. Because I don't know who said it, you have to invest money in order to get money back. But the response from you and Dr. Zuniga and the board was, no, we don't want to go there. Because when we put dollars into that PARS fund, it's tied up in there. You cannot move it. You cannot do anything to it. And you said, no, we don't want to do that, and we don't want to invest our money. We created fund number what? Where we put the dollars, and then we can move it and manipulate it however we want. What is it?
Fund 17.
Fund 17. So I see what Mr. Diaz is saying, but to me, that's still a Band-Aid to a huge problem. I mean, you could stop the blood from coming out and us bleeding all those dollars. The state has to take this on. There is no way any single district by themselves is going to solve this problem. Would you agree with that? I don't care how many cost-saving strategies you have. And you're seasoned in your profession. If there's a place where you can save money, you're conservative, you're going to do it if we're not already doing it. I think this is again, I don't know how else to describe it. It's a Band-Aid to a cut that's bleeding, like it's gushing out, like the carotid it's gushing out, and a Band-Aid is not going to stop it, no matter what little, you know, strategies or things that we do. Agree or disagree?
Okay, so I wanted to answer this question and say that, okay, the district is in very good shape fiscally. Okay, it just, we're trying to address new requirements that the state is imposing on school districts that we believe they are bad law. And would increase the risk of school districts, including us, to be challenged fiscally. Okay. So we're trying to address it in so many different ways. One of them, obviously, is increasing the pressure on the state to abandon the bad laws that could create a challenging situation for all school districts, including us. We're actually in a much better shape than other districts, if you know what I mean. And then the second part is that we have to also address the operational side of it. If that law is going to be in place, which we believe at this point in time it's not even one of the items that CSBA is focusing on. Because there had been focus before from other organizations to change it, but there had been little movement in that regard. So we're trying to mitigate that issue in so many different ways. But at the end of the day, you know, I hope that the state will learn not by trial and error when a large district end up, you know, like what happened in Englewood a few years ago, when they, you know, they had their fiscal issues.
Yeah.
And the state had to come and take over. Yes. So I think that's what we're trying to say here is that the state believes, some folks in the state believes that the rainy fund that they created will cover the downside for a school district. But it's only $10 billion. In the scheme of things, how much is the Proposition 98? It's $84 million. Okay, so that $10 billion can go away just like that. Like, you know, within like a COVID-19 situation can utilize all this $10 billion. So they think that they have a protection for school districts. And I think our responsibility is, and you know, to let them know that $10 billion is not going to be sufficient, and 10% is too close to comfort. Okay, I mean, you know, you don't do that with your household. I mean, you know,
Another thing that's really scary is I was looking at, I don't remember where I read it, and I don't know if my colleagues saw this, but I saw the number of elected officials that are either moving on to other positions or no longer wanting to run, or redistricting has phased some people out. They're going to have a lot of new Green Assembly members and new senators that are going to be coming in. And anytime you have new people, okay, it's kind of like when I got on the board or David got on the board, you know, you run your campaign, you say your platform about what you want to bring, but then is that in the LCAP or not? Like, you already have kind of like restricted dollars per se based on the plan that you have. The point I'm trying to make is that's going to happen in the big picture with the big budget in the state of California, that you have these new young legislators that are inexperienced and are going to be learning the ropes per se. And then we have this huge problem upon us. So it's just, the timing is just bad for a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? New legislators over there that don't really know the system, and big problems down in our neighborhoods. And I don't know if the state will be able to solve it. You know, I don't know. It's just a lot of those conditions that are here in our face, like, that we have to deal with, you know? Yeah. I don't know. I still think it's not a problem that one district can take on. It has to be a collective effort, but I think the state has to solve that problem for us. We cannot solve it alone.
Yeah. Mr. Seegers, do you have any?
No,
No?
it's okay. No,
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll just conclude with saying, you know, I think we need to do these things concurrently. All the cost-saving measures, even though it's a Band-Aid, it at least slows down some of the impact. I understand, you know, another measure on a parcel tax can be regressive. And then that continued need for advocacy around these issues. So it's definitely complex, and it's not going to get solved overnight, and not tomorrow night or the next year or the year after that, but it's going to take steady pressure to resolve this. So with that, unless Dr. Zuniga, you have anything to add here, I'm going to say thank you to Mr. Alatar and Mr. Norden. You're part to stay up here because the next item is yours too, but
really quick, this bad law, is it an Assembly bill, Senate bill? What is it called? Give us a number, give us a name, so that when we go, we're like,
I'll
you need to
provide
end this. Like, all of us have excellent relationships with our Assembly. I mean, all of us are very well connected, every single one of us. But I think it's educating them to then talk to their colleagues that don't live in my district, or, you know, they're not going to listen to us. We're not their constituents. But you see what I'm saying, though? We have to educate our own legislators, so then they advocate and convince the Inglewoods, the You know, and as we've learned in California, the needs in Southern California are very different than the Central Valley and, you know, the northern part of California, you know. So yeah, I think for us, when we go, like, we preach to the choir.
Yeah.
We preach to the choir. You know, Senator is a former teacher. She knows what's about. Assemblywoman Blanca Rubio, teacher. Lisa Calderon, I'm not sure what her background is, but she is very in tune with her community, with our communities from around here. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll provide you with the information for how this came about. And
You don't know the name? Is it a Senate bill or is it an Assembly bill?
It was 2014, I believe, or
Okay.
2016.
I think it's in our packet,
It's not
so.
anything, it's just existing law.
Existing law, but where
The
do
last
we
16?
find it to get it in print? Say, you see this, Assemblywoman? You see this, Senator? You see this, you know, Congresswoman? Like this stuff is causing a lot of ruckus in our school district, and unless we put it in your face, like, nothing's gonna happen.
Okay.
Because just because CSBA is not using it as one of their
Okay,
talking
so-
points, you know, I still keep CSBA's little card right here of like, you know, that we rank 48th in per pupil funding and all those
That's the
things that they
change.
want us to address when we see our legislators.
Okay, the
Yeah.
changes, okay.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
If that's not one on them, then no one's gonna talk about that. Nothing's gonna get done, because they don't even know about it.
So the changes, the last changes to that, because the law actually started was in 2014, but the last changes was SB 751, that was signed by Governor Brown in October 11, 2017.
Hold on, repeat that. SB
SB 751,
751, okay.
for
37,
Governor
okay.
Brown signed on October 11, 2017. And it was two senators, one from San Mateo and the other one is from Orinda, Orinda.
Of course, I don't even know where the heck that is. That's why, it's always those that do those bills that, don't even get me started with that late arrival
Yep.
time and all that, like.
So, thank you, Mr. Alatar and Mr. Norden. We're going to move on to the regular agenda here, which is item number 1, which is consider approval of second interim financial report and board certification of the financial stability of the district for fiscal year 21-22 and 2 subsequent years, 22-23 and 23-24.
Move to approve?
We have motion to approve.
Second.
Second. Is there any discussion?
Nope.
Hearing none, all those members in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous here. Next item here is consider approval to award an agreement bid number 2021-22 B6 for Mountain View High School Zoo Crew Project to PCN3 Inc.
Move to approve?
Second.
Any discussion?
Just a quick comment. Happy to see this project moving forward. I know the space there that's going to be renovated very well, and I'm happy to see that it's going to be repurposed for an excellent program, an award-winning program at that. So thank you to staff and congratulations to Mountain View and to Zoo Crew Project for all the amazing work that they've done and the even more amazing work that they will be able to do in that space.
Thank you, Mr. Briones.
Just want to clarify, this actually has a state matching fund.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Alatar. So with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item passes. Item number 3 here is consider approval of ratify contract agreement between Albany High School District and Alley Arts Group to provide workshops for students district-wide.
Move to approve?
Second.
Any discussion, comments, remarks?
Great, the arts are great. We need to expose our kids to all these arts for the same reason of ethnic studies and going in person to see all these places, museums, and just for our kids to be more knowledgeable so that when they leave little old El Monte, they're well-rounded.
Thanks, Mr. Padilla. All those members in favor say aye.
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 Item approved. Number 4 here is consider approval of resolution number 40-2122 for Adult Education Week.
Move to approve?
Second.
Any discussion?
Just a
Go ahead,
Comments?
Mr. Padilla.
Just a comment. It was great to see in Mr. Alatar's budget that they have a very healthy budget right now. It has not always been the case. I've been on this board at the time when many neighboring school districts got rid of their adult education program. And I think that was one of the stupidest things that districts ever did around us. And hopefully and luckily, we did not join in on that. We stood firm with supporting adult education in our community because they support it. And even when it was costing us like $1 million or $2 million out of our budget, I don't know if it was ever that high. Was it 1 million, 2 million where they were encroaching in the budget? You remember that?
For
Adult ed.
I mean,
What-
that's back before my time.
Oh, okay, that's right. Oh, so during your time, we're doing really good, right? All right, Mr. Alatar, that was the other guy, right? The guy that we got rid of. Okay, so that's just my comment. I am so glad that we support adult education and anything adult education does. I visited there multiple times and just, it's amazing. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Briones.
Very quickly, I want to just state that by adopting the resolution, our board continues to reaffirm our support, as has been stated by Mr. Padilla, reaffirm our support for our adult education program. Having had many of my family members go through MRAS over the years, I've had family members take English classes there. I've had family members take citizenship classes there. And of course, this board, as I stated, has reaffirmed its support by electing to reopen our Rosemead property in a few years as the Amani Rosemead Adult School Rosemead campus once again. So I'm happy to see that we continue to advocate for our adult education program.
Thank you. All those members in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item passes. Next, we're going to go into board communication roundtable and closure of the meeting. I'm going to start to my left with Mr. Padilla. Mr. Padilla?
It's your treat for tonight. No comments. I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Padilla. Mr. Briones?
Thank you, Vice President Diaz. I just wanted to share very quickly, thank you to everyone who participated in the Parent Involvement Academy last Friday at Pacific Palms Resort. I had the privilege of attending Mr. Cecil's session, as well as Mr. Bernthal's Roadmap to College session as well. Both were very informative. And I was happy to see the hundreds of parents that were there at the event, including the hundreds of parents from our own district that participated. It was a very, very wonderful event, and I'm happy to see that it's back in person once again. I'm looking forward to seeing the progression of that program in the near future. Other item, and I kind of touched on this earlier, I had the opportunity to meet with Assemblywoman Lisa Calderon yesterday, as well as Assemblywoman Rubio today, and tomorrow we'll be meeting with Senator Anthony Portantino tomorrow as part of CSBA's Legislative Action Week. So, I wanted to reiterate to Mr. Alator that the items that you mentioned, we have been discussing them with them and asking for their support on those items. And there does appear to be support from the legislators, at least here locally, on those asks. So we will continue to work with the legislators to get support for those items to ensure that we're able to fully fund our school programs, that any mandates that are coming from the state are fully funded, and that, of course, that, if there's an opportunity to increase non-Prop 98 funding, that it does happen, that if there is an opportunity to provide funding for student transportation projects, that's fully funded as well, and so we will continue to advocate. So looking forward to a meeting tomorrow, and I did want to thank Mrs. Torres de Segrist for being at yesterday's meeting with Ms. Assemblywoman Calderon and advocating on behalf of our students as well. That's it for me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Briones. And Sitlali, any items you want to bring up tonight?
Is it okay if I backtrack on my communications, just giving some more insight, because I know I missed those?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We already got the handout from Dr. Zuniga.
Thank you.
Great, awesome, thank you. So essentially there was a bit of miscommunication between me and Dr. Zuniga, so I had the impression that our meeting was going to start at 7:30, but I guess that was our Monday meeting, so that was why I was a little late, so I apologize. It wasn't my intention.
We're glad to hear.
Anyways, so we have our Student Advisory Council meeting on Monday, 7:30 in the morning. Do you see where we got a little miscommunication there? And also, I wanted to present to you my editor-in-chief column. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Panther Post at Rosemead High School, and I wrote a column on the achievement gap at Rosemead High School. It focuses on the Latino achievement gap at my school. I felt it was an important article to write, especially because I feel like it's the big elephant in the room at my school, if you haven't noticed. And I would really appreciate it if you took some time to read it tonight or whenever you have time. I've been getting a lot of feedback from a lot of students who say that they related to the story. And also, just today, I heard that a teacher used that in a history class as part of their class for today, for their lesson plan. And my Spanish teacher actually also made it an assignment today. So when I got to my 5th period Spanish class, I was shocked to see that reading my article was part of the assignment. I've also gotten some feedback that there's some students at Albany High School who've been reading it and who have been crying. So, like, you know, there's like this like shock, but also it's really comforting to know that a lot of students have read it and are kind of comforted by it. I think that it's something that you should really look into. I mostly brought it today simply because I don't want it to get overlooked. I feel like often our problems do get overlooked, and I also feel like when it is just one article from one student, it's really easy to get put under the rug. And so I think presenting it to the board is my way of saying, I want it to be on paper and I want it to be on print and I don't want it to get forgotten. So those are essentially my communications for today. Also, the EMUHSD CARES team is still working together. Our committee is kind of small right now, so we're trying to expand a bit because we do feel like we need more staff and some more students to get involved. So that's something that we're still working on. We did have a meeting on Tuesday, and we're going to be having another meeting on Friday. So I just wanted to let you know. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Torres-Seegers?
Yes. I attend a special Zoom meeting that we have about girl states. We were invited, especially El Monte Union High School District, because El Monte Union High School District has been doing very well during all these years. And the most important topic that we were talking about was about equity. It's going to be one of the topics that we are going to see with our delegates in Sacramento when they go to Girl State. I attend the El Monte Council PTA, and also I agree with Mr. Briones that the Academy, the Parents Involvement Academy was wonderful. And I have a lot of parents who were talking about your wonderful, wonderful workshop, and they want to have it in Spanish. They were kind of upset because they were in Spanish. And I said, well, I will let him know. But everybody, that's the reason I didn't eat with all of you, because I was sitting upstairs with a group of parents in a beautiful terraza. And they got me and they said, we want Mr. Ciso to give us that workshop in Spanish, okay? And you'll do it because, and especially because you follow the PTA idea. Parents are the first educators. And that's very important that the parents pay attention to their kids. Thank you very much, Mr. Ciso. You are supporting us a lot. And now I also, yesterday, I participated in the CSBA legislative action. With Mr. Briones, it was very, very interesting, and especially when we were talking about the LCFF, ADA, relief, the school transportation programs, mental health that we need to have at this moment is another topic that PTA has been studying a lot, the mental health for our students. We have to try to do the best. Yesterday, I attended another Zoom meeting with that is called the legislation advocacy, that is every month. I'm registering that one, and yesterday the topic was mental health for helping our students. Mr. Diaz, that's it for me.
Thank you, and thank you both, to our colleagues here, Mr. Briones and Stella Torres-Seegers, for your advocacy with CSBA and our legislators. So thank you on behalf of Albany High School District. For me, I just wanted to follow up on the comments earlier made by our presenters around how we can continue the ethnic studies portion, Mr. Cecil, and specifically the Rio Hondo collaboration for the college credit. Can you, if you can't tonight, I mean, how do we make that happen, or how can we, offer ethnic studies at these respective campuses in partnership with Rio Hondo?
What we do, there's a need or demand, not I say demand, but there's a need.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, I have a mic on, so I'll talk louder. What we're looking at is when we talk about dual enrollment, we find out that there's a need or, want for students to want these classes, and we are in constant contact. They already do Chicano studies, so we're just going to see what other programs we could bring in as part of their AA or AS degree program that can lead into that, that we can mold into some of our campuses. But we can definitely do dual enrollment classes and anything that they're always willing to work with us, in other words.
Okay.
So before the even meeting, I was talking to Tabata about it, and I said, I want to work with your group, and I'll work with Kirk. Kirk oversees the dual enrollment program with Rio Hondo College, and we can definitely make that happen.
Yeah, because I think that's something that this board would be pretty supportive of.
Absolutely, and I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Cecil. And the other remark is just, I know we just received this article by Silali tonight, but maybe Mr. or Dr. Zuniga, if you could just, make some remarks or comment in your roundtable, which I'm going to hand over to you next, because I know you had some roundtable items. Yes, sir.
Mr. Padilla, if I could add, could I read a part of the actual article, if you don't mind? Okay, so this is like in the middle of the section, first page, back, towards the bottom. I have been taking AP courses since my sophomore year of high school, with the first being AP World History and Geography. In my second period class that year, 2019, I was the only Latina student enrolled. Up until that aforementioned class, I had never felt such a high level of discomfort. Until that time, I'd always been in classrooms where at least some of my peers looked like me, talked like me, and shared similar lived experiences and backgrounds. Sitting in that classroom was also the first time I felt what true imposter syndrome felt like. I was sitting in a pool of people that didn't look like me, and as a result, I found myself questioning if I was even qualified to be there, often leaving me to question whether or not I should drop out the course. I felt like an outlier, and it was an isolating feeling. To be clear, my peers never did or said anything explicitly to make me feel like an outsider. But when you're in a place where there aren't any individuals who share your cultural background, it's easy to lose your sense of belonging and community. Sadly, the truth is that since then, all of my experiences in AP classes have paralleled the one I previously mentioned. Over a 3-year span, I've taken a total of 7 AP classes, none of which have looked any different. It's an easy reality to ignore for people who aren't directly impacted, but for me, it's been one I haven't been able to ignore since I stepped foot on this campus. 3 years is a long time for there to be no change, and it's a reality that has followed me and countless other Latino students for years. Rosemead High School alum and a documented college graduate, Israel, class of 2015, shared his own experiences with me. He described how, and I quote, "Some AP teachers were also skeptical of my wanting to be in their classes, often giving tired or frustrated reactions to my repeated requests to be added to their class roster." Additionally, Israel intimated that while he understood their frustrations because, quote-unquote, having another student meant more work and less time to provide support for their already overloaded classrooms, the very fact that I was not in that class already spoke volumes to whom the school focused their attention on. When I asked Israel for possible solutions to help close the achievement gap that exists amongst our Latino population, he said students should be encouraged to thrive and pushed to not settle. It is essential to provide students with the opportunity to challenge themselves and to prove others and themselves wrong. I am unsure where I would be right now if I was not encouraged to try or be given the opportunity by a select few to try in the first place. And then you also mentioned the discomfort. And that's something that I mentioned in the article as well when I said, I'm well aware that this article may be hard for some to digest. It requires one to reflect on how you, the educator, administrator, or parent, plays a pivotal role in shrinking the Latino achievement gap at RHS. To put it simply, one needs to view themselves as either part of the solution or a part of the problem. My hope, however, is that campus elders will read this and decide to be a part of the solution. And you mentioned that this is just one, story. And I do think that's true because, I've also heard from a lot of students that they related to this article, which I kind of expected because I had conversations about writing this article previous to this. I've been having these conversations for 4 years, since I first stepped on this campus. I had this conversation with my brother when I was in 8th grade, and he was, I believe, a sophomore, and he had told me that to be prepared to feel a little uncomfortable on that campus, that I would be walking into classrooms where not all the students looked like me, and that I would sometimes feel like I didn't belong. And he told me, you have to sit there even if you feel that way, because walking away isn't going to make that problem go away. So that's why I sat in those classrooms, and I have sat in those classrooms. And when I talk to other students, I always felt like maybe I'm crazy, maybe this is just like a problem that I'm dealing with. And then as I would talk to more students, I realized that this was really common. It was just something we didn't talk about. And so when I think about it that way, I also think about how other students might be experiencing this on other campuses. And I'm just not aware of it because this is something that I see on a daily basis. But obviously I don't go to Mountain View High School or Albany High School or any of our other schools. And so when we have a problem like this happening at one of our most, higher achieving schools in our district, I wonder if this is paralleled across all of our other school campuses. And if that's the case, that's concerning to me. Something that I mentioned before is that it's in here. I talked about how I said it set a new precedent for me, and this is when I was talking about my counselor and how a lot of my calls to be put in advanced courses were disregarded my first year. It set a new precedent for me to understand that in order to succeed on this campus, I would have to make noise and self-advocate. I would have to vocalize my educational demands and needs, because if I didn't, choices would be made for me. The fact that I had to self-advocate and make noise speaks volumes on how we're serving our students. Because it takes a lot of bravery to self-advocate. And a lot of our students come into these rooms, like I said, with imposter syndrome, feeling like they don't belong, and they don't have that within themselves, sadly, because of everything that's been set up against them to say, hey, no, I actually want to stay here, or I actually do belong here. And that worries me. And I don't want this to be a conversation that gets left behind, because that happens a lot. This table is key in making those changes. And I say that because I know that we have a lot of discussions. And my concern is, when I'm gone, what's going to happen then? Because I can't sit here and say, okay, in 2 months, I'm hoping to see change. I'm sure that's not how it works. I know that's not how it works. But I'm hoping that these conversations continue and that there is actual change. And that someone like me won't sit at this table, or another Latina student won't be writing a column in 5 years about the same experience. Because that's concerning to me. 2015, class of 2015. And I'm sure that it goes back further. I just happened to have a mutual contact with Israel, and I knew that he had this experience. So I just feel like this was something important to bring up, and I wanted to bring it up here at the board because I know that there really is no way to keep me quiet once it's on here. And that's important to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Silali. And I think, if everyone's okay with Mr. Padilla's recommendation, seems like we can do that at minimum. And then Dr. Zuniga, if you want to expand on next steps and what that's going to look like. If you have it tonight, great. If not, maybe next board meeting.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to work with the Educational Services Department and come up with a plan. I think it needs to be constructed where everyone is aware of it, from families to teachers to the board to the superintendent, and hold accountability on that. There should be a threshold about goal setting, about the percentage of students that need to be in AP courses by ethnicity and enrollment. Given the circumstance that we're dealing with, we're seeing this not only at Rosemead High School. Historically, we've seen it at many of our schools. And if they don't have a plan in place, then, as you mentioned, nothing will push that next step into making sure that equity and that access is there. We've increased our AP courses, but have we increased the opportunities of Latino students to be in AP courses, to challenge them? And I think educating and supporting our families, understanding that your kids are going to be challenged, but it's okay. And if your kid is challenged, then the support needs to be there for those kids to be successful in that classroom and feel good about what they're doing in that classroom. So work with Edu Services. We'll probably come, I would say, if it's not April, definitely in a couple of weeks, we can bring it back to the board and have a plan about how we want to approach AP moving forward to address the equity issue within our Latino population in AP enrolled courses.
And just to add, I would really appreciate, like Mr. Diaz said, and Mr. Padilla, to promote this across all of our school campuses. That would mean a lot to me. And I know that I'm lucky enough to have some contacts from other schools, and I've asked that they read it. And lucky for me that out of their own kindness and out of their own willingness, they decide to ask their friends and other teachers to read it as well. But I think that having the support of the board to promote it more would be really great, because I do think that it's an article that might impact a lot of students and might bring them a lot of comfort.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My response to that is I think it's a great idea not only to share with the internal staff, but also with the community through the Mid-Valley News article featured, but also to the superintendents, instead of a monthly newsletter, that we just focus on this article. And it becomes evident that this is one of the top priorities of our school district next year. It circles around equity, so we have to make sure that this is part of it, part of that process, part of that goal setting. So that would be something I would do for our staff, all of our students, and also ensure that our district administration and school administrators have a study session on this too in our next retreat as well.
Mr. Diaz, if I may?
Yeah.
And Dr. Zuniga, you kind of touched on what I was about to share. I think it's great that you have those contacts, that Ms. Palacios, that you have those contacts at the other schools. Perhaps having the other school papers republish your article.
Good idea.
Yeah, I would love that. I think that's
Yeah.
a great idea.
Yeah.
We also would like to establish roundtable discussions for having the discussion with students at all schools.
Yeah. I think we're brainstorming now of all the different things that we could do. I think that they're all great, and I think we're going to have consensus here, as we could see that we're very supportive of this. So yeah, that's great, you know. And I remember when I came on the board in 2013, we were recognized as the mid-sized district of the year, AP classes. And I'll tell you, when I was in Florida, because we had to go to Florida, I think it was, to get the award, I remember just listening to some of the public speakers from our district and then public speakers from other districts. And I remember some of the speakers that we had, I just kind of cringed. The kids that were up there, they had no public speaking experience. And then you could see that the other kids had been coached, somebody had written their speech. And that was like something that we can work on, you know what I mean? So yeah, thank you for bringing this. It puts it in my face of like this is who we're, at the end of the day, you're the number one customer. And it's funny that you're from Rosemead High School, you know, I'm Rosemead alumni, and I remember getting to this big argument with the teacher when he criticized me on that dais saying, you know, I don't like your analogy of you referring to our kids as a customer, but I still stand by that. You are the number one customer, and if our product sucks, meaning the instruction sucks, okay, that's the product that we give to students. If it sucks, that's why students want to go to other school districts, because that school's not offering what they want, or we're not being competitive. And in the United States, that's the way the thing works. The customer rules, the customer is always right, and if you don't get what you get, you should go somewhere else. You know what I mean? Even if it's not a public school. So that we need to be able to compete. So when I see this, Itlali, it reminds me of why I'm here. And I know it does the same thing for my colleagues. Like, this is why you're here. And if you don't do anything to address this, then you don't need to be here.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Zuna, any other remarks or roundtable items you wanted to bring up tonight?
Yeah, just a couple, not comments, but really what you anticipate in the summer and ahead. I think this is a great segue to what we want to focus on. We are scheduled to bring all administrators at the end of the year to, you know, prepare for next year. This is a wonderful segue to it and talk about the equity. We talked about revisiting our model and our vision, and, you know, that would circle around or really include the equity component of what our needs are. And then July 30th is one day that I'm proposing for our board retreat. If that date works for you, it is a Saturday. It would be just a one-day Saturday event like we have done 2 years ago. Even last year we did it virtually. So if you can please take a look at your calendars, I'll add it onto the Friday memo just to see if that date works for you, and I'll follow up with each one of you. And maybe we can plan ahead, and I can inform our district admin team and our site principals and administrators too.
I will be out of town July 30th. I will be out of town.
On that 30th?
Yeah, I will be out of town starting July 28th.
Okay. So what I'll do then to propose, I would add a few other dates that may work for you, whether it's sometime in July or in early August, right before our actual start of our school year. We were trying to stay away from July because we go dark in July, because I know that's the time you guys plan for your vacation.
Yeah.
But that July 30th date was the one date that we looked at. Perhaps the following Saturday would be another date, would be the first week of August as well. So I could put that in your memo again, and we can revisit this when we come back in 2 weeks for our meeting. That way all of our board members are here, and then kind of give you some idea about looking at your calendars as well.
I won't be back till August 9th.
August 9th?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So if we had to go through that, then we'd go back into late June or sometime in July. So.
Okay.
Okay.
If yeah, if I can send Silali as my proxy, or maybe just join virtually or something. Okay,
We'll get some dates though. We'll get some dates. So
Okay.
there's time for that. So we'll provide you some dates for next time.
Okay.
And hopefully next on April 6th, we'll come to a consensus of what day works best for everyone.
Okay.
Thank you. That's it.
That's it? Okay. So moving on to the next item here, which is adjournment of meeting. It is approximately 9:29, and so I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, folks. See you next month.
Thank you.